Good afternoon. It is September 24, 2019. We are resuming our Lane County Board of Commissioners meeting. I'm going to start off this afternoon with a discussion, item 12A, discussion of the Lane County Courthouse replacement update. For those following our agenda, we'll then, if we finish that period, about an hour we've set aside, and then we'll go into the remainder of the items on our agenda. So at this time, item 11A is our Lane County Courthouse replacement update. With us is a group of folks who are eminently involved in this process. Steve Mokrahysky, Lane County Administrator, the Honorable Deborah Vogt, Presiding Judge, Lane County Circuit Court, Patty Perlow, District Attorney of Lane County, Cliff Harold, Sheriff of Lane County, and also joining the panel is Devin Ashbridge, the Public Information Director for Lane County. We set this up for a 20-minute presentation followed by up to 40 minutes of questions and comments from commissioners. And so I'd like to now turn this over to Administrator Mokrahysky to start things off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for introducing our guests at the table here. I won't do that again. I know the commissioners are familiar with all these folks, but for the folks watching here, I do also want to introduce the individuals in the front row seated back here. Alex Kyler, our Intergovernmental Relations Manager, Liz Rambo, the Circuit Court Administrator, Mike Penwell, our Capital Projects Manager with Lane County, Jeff Kincaid, Management Analyst in County Administration, Greg Rickoff, our Director of Operations, and Christine Moody, our Budget Manager back there. So all resources to you today if you have questions that the folks sitting at the table may or may not be able to answer. I'm going to provide some introductory comments. Devin Ashbridge, our Public Information Officer, will give you an overview of the results of the May 2019 election. And talk about our post-election survey as well as a proposed public engagement process going forward. And then I'll have a few wrap-up comments and invite the presiding judge, district attorney, and sheriff to provide some comments for you as well before we get into questions. So I want to first just say that we're coming to you today and recognizing that we have an opportunity to listen and learn from this process that we've gone through at the courthouse. And I think it's important to reflect on the fact that, as we all know, the current Lane County Courthouse was opened in 1959, so it's now over 60 years old. Of course, the issues related to safety, security, operational inefficiencies, and the multitude of challenges that we'll articulate briefly here again today continue in that facility. We've long known that these have been issues. And in fact, going back to 2014-15, we engaged with the National Center for State Courts to conduct a feasibility study to identify the needs of the courts and public safety system for a new justice center and courthouse. After that scoping study or that feasibility study was completed, we then moved into a process along with the city of Eugene and Cameron McCarthy, local architecture firm, to identify some massing and talk about the appropriate location for a proposed courthouse and other public facilities in the downtown area. And we subsequently engaged with Robertson Sherwood and DLR Group, local and national experts in courthouse design and construction, to conduct a scoping study that was completed in 2018. So all of this planning work led up to the election. Important to know that that process resulted in a land exchange, a purchase and sale agreement between the city of Eugene and Lane County, which really tried to identify the highest and best use for critical public properties in downtown Eugene. So that was a really important community engagement and community development project that's resulted in the ability for the city of Eugene and this community to come around and have discussions about the restoration of the park blocks and the town square for the community. In addition, we secured, so important to know that in January of 2019, just this last January, is when we signed that purchase and sale agreement. Shortly thereafter, the commissioners voted unanimously to place a measure on the ballot in May. And we began the process to very quickly ramp up a information sharing effort with the community, but we had a very short period of time to do that. During that time and towards the end of the process for the May election, the state legislature was considering the approval of $87.6 million in bond funding, which was subsequently approved by the legislature. And we need to give a great thank you to our legislators for their efforts to support that funding. So it is planned for those $87.6 million in state funding, the 50% of this state court costs, to be sold by March of 2021. So this discussion today is both, we believe, an opportunity to listen and learn from what we heard from the community in the lead up to the May election and as a result of the election, and contemplate the opportunities going forward before we get to that March 2021 sale of the state bonds. With that, I want to turn it over to Devin to walk through the results from the election and the post-election survey.
So, Commissioners, as you're aware, Measure 20-299 received 41.8% support in the May 21 election. In total, our voter turnout across the county was just under 30%, and so that meant a total of just over 77,000 ballots were cast in that election. Of that, about 31,476 voted in favor of the measure, and nearly 44,000 did not vote in favor of the measure. And so you can see that we had overall a fairly consistent voter turnout, although low for the special election. And within that, most people who cast ballots did weigh in on our measure as well. When we look at the election results geographically, we can see that focusing on the Gene Springfield metro area in this map, there were several precincts that supported the measure. Anything in blue there, so that center portion of the map, represents a precinct that supported the measure at 60% or greater. You can see that the purple supported the measure at 50% or greater. And the green precincts outline those that were close to support at between 45 and 50% support in those precincts. The others that are the tan color represent precincts in which there was less than 45% support overall. So you can see that the strongest support for the measure was really concentrated in that south central Eugene area, as well as some strong support in West Springfield. But it really does give you a sense of where the support was concentrated throughout Lane County. So moving on to survey results, we conducted a survey of frequent voters shortly after the election. Between June 12th and June 17th, we surveyed a total of 384 frequent voters. So that means people who have voted in the last 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 4 elections. It's important to note that we organized the survey in such a way that we reached out to representative samples of unincorporated residents, Eugene residents, and Springfield residents to help give us a sense of where we had support, where we didn't have support, and why, in a way that represents the county, especially that urban versus rural voter population. The total margin of error for the survey was 4.82% at the 95% confidence level. It's also important to note that we chose to conduct the survey closer to the date of the election, so the issues would be fresh in voters' minds rather than wait until late August when the election was certified. So there is a chance that some of the respondents had not voted in the May election. However, the survey was organized in such a way that we asked for voters to share what their thoughts were so that people were more likely to be honest in the survey company's experience. When people are asked, did you vote or did you not, in clear terms, they're less likely to be honest. Most people don't want to admit that they did not, in fact, vote. So organizing the survey in this manner helped encourage people to be very honest and very free with their feedback, and we hope that we benefit from that. So one of the questions identified in the survey asked the respondents to give the top reason that they believe the measure did not pass. And you can see that the first two answers, which are by and large the majority of respondents, identified cost, either through cost of the project or cost of taxes to be too high. And so that was the most significant answer from respondents. You can also see that there was some respondents felt that the courthouse was in good shape, and then several were unable to identify more specifically some of their answers. But the cost of the project and taxes were what the majority of respondents, nearly 60%, identified as the top reason that they didn't believe the measure received support. One of the other interesting questions asked during the survey is if voters felt they had enough information to make the decision, and 83% of voters responded that they did in fact have enough information they felt to make their decision. And so that was an interesting finding in light of the response to this question. We asked respondents whether they were aware that the sheriff's and district attorney's offices were included in the proposal. 76% of respondents reported that they were aware that the new courthouse would have included those offices. 21% were not aware, and 3% were unsure. When you take a look at that 21% that were unaware and 3% that were not sure and break that group down a little bit further, what we found is that if those voters who were unsure would have known that the proposal included the sheriff's office and the district attorney's office, 49% of those would have favored the proposal and 34% would have opposed, 17% remained unsure. But it is important to note this is 49% of that 24%. So this is a smaller subset of the survey respondents, but it does help us understand better whether that information could have potentially moved voters one way or the other. We also asked respondents whether they were aware that the proposal prioritized local workers. In development of the survey, we chose not to use the term community benefits agreement because we didn't want the results to be inaccurate if people weren't familiar with that term, because it is a fairly new term to our community. And a lot of the messaging we did around the community benefits agreement talked about local workers. And so we asked it in that manner to try to get some accurate information. And 39% of respondents in this case stated that they were aware that the proposal would have prioritized local workers. 53% reported that they were unaware of that part of the proposal, and 8% were unsure. When we drill down into that 61% that fall into the unaware and unsure category, we see that had they been aware of that, 42% would have been more likely to favor the proposal, 44% would have been more likely to oppose the proposal, and 14% remained unsure. Moving forward, we've identified 6 phases that can be supported through public engagement and communication. And so included in that and beginning over the next several months are the phase evaluation and planning, really taking a look at for the remainder of the calendar year, what can we do to reevaluate and really look at every part of our proposal in light of what we have heard and learned from voters, both through the survey as well as feedback that we received immediately following the election. And then continuing to move into a proposal refinement, public outreach stage, continuing to provide, of course, regular updates to the Board of Commissioners, identifying where there may be points at which we need decisions from the board, a continued public information phase, and then considering with the board the potential for another future public vote. And so we've really identified and highlighted how important it is to continue to work with our community, to gain that feedback, and to have the discussion on how we can move forward.
So just briefly, you know, we want to reiterate that there has continued to be work on this project that the project team has pursued. We appreciate the fact that we have not talked a lot about this effort since May, but we have continued to move forward in ways that we believe we need to, including hiring Robertson Sherwood Architects and DLR Group through a competitive procurement process to provide architectural and engineering services for the project. The project team has conducted meetings with Courthouse advocates. These are individuals who supported the effort throughout, who wrote letters as part of the voter information that was put out, who went out and spoke on behalf of the effort to discuss public engagement strategies and lessons learned. We've developed, as you see here, a proposed timeline and tasks going forward that we'd like direction from the board on. And we continue to explore additional funding mechanisms and strategies. So that's where we're at, and I'd like to now ask the presiding judge and then the DA and then the sheriff to provide some of their perspective and context on the project.
So it's okay. So I just wanted to make a few comments about my experience going through this. I wanted to thank all of our Board of Commissioners, every one of you. This was an effort that I felt everybody was on board for. I worked with all of you at some level or another and talked to some of you about the things that we were working on in that very short time frame that we had from the land acquisition all the way to the date of the election. I think it was a very short run. We were doing that and had that length of time for a specific reason, and that had a lot to do with the legislature. So I want to thank all of you and our legislative delegation because they did secure that bond. Now at this point, that is secure if we can get with our community and learn from this election and learn from our community's vote to get what we need to go forward in the future. And I think that's super important. So I thank all of you and I thank all of them. I also wanted to just comment that the situation is real. The courthouse is not getting any better at this point in time. I know that you all have recognized our September has brought with it a lot of rain, and with some of the deluge that we've had recently, we now know that our archives section leaks when you have a lot of rain, and we are now dealing with that through drip pans on top of the archives records department for the court. And so each week we have kind of something new that's still coming up with the courthouse failing around us, and we're dealing with that. But I wanted to just make sure that everybody was aware that we're still dealing with all the maintenance problems, and they aren't getting any better over there, although we're trying to shore them up as much as we can. I also wanted to just make sure that all of you, as far as the commissioners, were aware that the circuit court is wanting to go down this road with you. All the judges are on board with this project. Everyone wants to put forth whatever effort they can to assist. And I think that the outline that we have that has just been presented, I think is a good outline for recognizing what our community was talking to us about and trying to figure out how we now move forward so that we can take advantage of that money, those bonds that have been secured with the legislature because that sale is in 21. So those were my comments I wanted to make and just really emphasize the thank you.
Well, I could reiterate the need. You all are aware of it, so I'm not going to spend any more time on that. I, too, want to thank you for making this a priority. I know you have a lot of competing demands for your time and attention, and the fact that you have made this a priority is really appreciated, because without you all engaging together as a board in the heavy lift, we aren't going any further with this. So I will end my remarks with that, unless you have questions at the end.
Well, the hazard of going last, of course, is repeating what both the Chief Judge and DA have remarked. But of course, I also thank you for the efforts that have been put forward by all of you and really the team, state and county officials that created this team that's put in quite a bit of work towards this. And I thank you for the opportunity to be talking about it today, to keep it on the radar so that it doesn't just disappear subsequent to the vote. The need, as you've heard and know, hasn't changed. The issues we struggled with before continue with respect to how the sheriff's office serves the courts in a safe manner and hopefully an efficient manner, although we know that we could increase efficiency significantly if we were able to increase the efficiency of the building. But the operations continue just as they were before, which is not the optimum by any means. So I appreciate the fact that we get to be here today to keep it on the radar, to be talking about a plan to try and move forward, because the need for the community exists, and we need to keep striving towards that. So thank you.
So I'll just close, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, by saying that, really 3 steps here, we believe. That, again, this is an opportunity to listen and learn, to reflect upon the process that we've been through and what we've heard from our community and from voters in the last election. We know that there's a need to reevaluate and refine the building proposal itself, and so the project partners are prepared to come together and put all options on the table to fix the existing problems, to add value for the community, to improve the efficiency of the justice system through building design. And then finally, we know that we need a robust public engagement process. So in combining all of those, listening and learning, refining and reevaluating the building proposal, and then engaging the community in what those solutions look like to move forward. So that's our presentation for you. We're here for questions and comments, and ultimately we would like some direction from the board related to the draft process moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Let me start by asking a few questions. One is, in the event that the county does not pass a measure for a new courthouse, do we forfeit the state money in March of 2021?
So specifically the question is,
If we don't get voter approval of a new county courthouse between now and March of 2021, do we forfeit the $87 million that the state has authorized for a bond sale?
yeah, I think I'll invite, Mr. Rickoff or Mr. Kyler to take that one on.
Chair Sorensen, Commissioners, the bonds are only for new construction, so indeed we would.
Okay. And Alex, you want to add something?
Well, and the state requires that we demonstrate the match prior to them issuing the bond. So absolutely, without the match, the state would not issue the bond.
So the match means we have to build a new courthouse of roughly double $87 million in order to qualify for the state match.
Roughly, yes.
Okay. And then maybe the 3 elected officials here could comment on this. Do you think we should move forward with a smaller design and a less costlier design, or should we move forward with essentially the same design?
Chair Sorensen, if the question is, can we function with a smaller designed courthouse? I would say for the efficiencies and the security that are required in order to move people through the building and keep them safe, the size of the building is going to be roughly the same. The cost of the building is actually in the, providing the means of moving people safely through the building, particularly people in the custody of the sheriff. And so, yeah, you can scale down the size of it, but it's not going to change the cost that much. And if you scale it down so it's just a courthouse and you don't have the DA's office or the sheriff's office in there, you're going to lose a lot of efficiencies. And you still have to find a place for us to live that's seismically sound, that doesn't have breaking water pipes, and that doesn't, I mean.
So basically, go for the larger amount is your recommendation.
Well, I can just tell you that I think that that is part of what has to be decided through the first 4 or 5 months of this process, maybe 6 months of this process, is because that's what we're evaluating, since that's what our survey from the voters talked about. And I don't think we have an answer, to be honest with you, Chair, because we haven't now been able to go through that with the architects and try to figure out what is possible within what is workable for the building. And so I think that that is absolutely part of what we're trying to figure out and what we need to figure out.
Okay.
But we don't have the answer yet, in my
right.
opinion.
I agree.
You agree, okay. Commissioners, I'm sure you have questions and comments. Who wants to be recognized? Sure. You? Okay. Commissioner Bozovich.
So, you all know I've been working on this for a long time, on the Association of Oregon Counties Court Facilities Task Force, working to keep our place in line and worked hard on the bond measure. The need for the courthouse hasn't changed. In between the election and now, I had to serve a day on jury duty. Didn't get selected for the pool. Got eliminated because turned out I knew the victim's family. But having to be part of that pool and get moved upstairs to be and then waiting my turn to be interviewed. What a yeah. The military would refer to it, in a rather colorful way, but getting those 60 people from downstairs up into the courtroom and then jamming us into that courtroom. I mean, we were hip to hip on those benches for almost 8 hours that day, going through the selection because it went into the next day. It was just insane. It took a good 40 minutes to move us up in the morning. It took us another 40 minutes to move us up after lunch, and it's like, how much time, 60 times 40 minutes is that, of people, not to mention the 2 staff of the judge that were helping move us, and then the judge and the victim's family and the defendant and the defendant's attorney and the DA, the assistant DA, all waiting in the courtroom for us to arrive and get in there and be organized. It was just amazing how inefficient this courthouse is. One of the difficulties, you guys get to talk about what's gone wrong since, that continues to go wrong. There are leaks and elevators that break down. One of the things we can't really talk about very well is the security incidents that have happened since then. Partly because we don't want to advertise our vulnerabilities in the courthouse, but there have been security incidents that have happened and continue to happen. It's not a safe facility as a courthouse. And it continues to be a difficult facility to run treatment courts in. And I think, the focus right now on addiction and mental health in our homeless population, treatment courts are one of our, golden pills against that, where we can actually take people and turn their lives around. And in those inefficient courtrooms and trying to run treatment courts are just insane sometimes. So such a need there. That all said, one of the things, Devin, if you can throw your chart back up there, my district voted against this massively. I think the least no vote was 62% in one of my precincts. It ran all the way up to almost 80% in Dune City. Florence, 72%. Junction City, 72% no. It was not popular in my district at all. and we talk about, do we change the building and all that stuff? Part of it is, I think there needs to be, that public outreach portion has to be part of the proposal refinement. If we don't have the public with us talking, and we're talking about these things, we made a lot of decisions in refining the courthouse proposal, which I strongly feel was not, we weren't gold plating anything, we weren't asking for extra space. We tried to be efficient in that project. And we also tried to be very honest in telling people what the total cost of the project was, instead of not counting the land in and not counting fees or not counting permits and just talking about construction cost of the building. Yeah, it would have sounded like a lot less costly project, but we tried to be very transparent and say, this is the total project cost. But we did a study about, what was going to be the most efficient, who should be in that building, who shouldn't be in that building. We didn't put anyone in that building that shouldn't be there. I mean, we weren't getting new offices in that building because we don't need to be there for the functioning of the court. The sheriff needs to be there. The DA's staff needs to be there, even though we're renting space downtown for DA staff, not in the building right now, even though jury assemblies in our building instead of the courthouse, which I just talked about. We really tried to be efficient, but people still thought we were trying to gold plate, asking for too much, confusing us with everything from City Hall to the federal court building in the comments I was hearing back. People not wondering why we couldn't continue using our existing building and why that was too small. So even to the point of where they thought we were building too big of courtrooms and not understanding the efficiency of having the same footprint on multiple floors of a multi-story building and how it lines up columns and beam sizes and actually makes the construction costs go down to repeat that footprint of a universal courtroom instead of trying to have a bunch of mismatched floor plans one above another. That all said, we have to bring the public in early so they can hear those conversations and have input on it so they have buy-in. We brought in national experts and followed the national experts' recommendations and came up with a building that we thought was the least costly, but the public wasn't following along with us in those conversations. So we have to go back to the public and start that conversation over again to get to a project the public understands and buys into. So, I don't think it's a question of should we build something smaller. We got to see what the public will lead us to in that process. I think if they follow along with all the experts that have been involved in trying to design a building that will function for Lane County over the next 100 years and be the most efficient and safe building we can make it, where everybody has equal access to justice, whether they're somebody in a wheelchair that wants to serve on a jury, or whether they're a victim of domestic violence that shouldn't be running into their abuser in the hallway. We need to go to the public and involve them in that conversation, or I'm going to be faced with my district telling me, what the heck are you coming back to us? Didn't you hear no the first time? Because that's what I heard in that election from my district was no.
Hey, Commissioner Burney, then Commissioner Buck.
First, I want to thank you all. You were very kind to me the first 5 months that I've ever been a county commissioner. You integrated my understanding. You welcomed my inputs. I feel like I should be on your side of this because I felt like we went to so many presentations together, and that goes for everyone in the next row back too. You were all wonderful, including Mr. Kyler, who attempted to guide me through my testimony to the right committee and did a good enough job so that, by the way, there will be several pieces of proposed legislation in the next biennium that are going to copy the community benefits piece of what the courthouse would have been bound by as it relates to all construction projects, not that this will go through, that have state financing or state bonding attached to them. So thank you all very much. I also want to say that I don't feel we got a full swing at the plate. I think we took one swing. And I think given the nature of events beyond our control, including land security, right? The securitizing of the property. There was not enough time to do a proper campaign. You know, my experience is brief in campaigns, but we didn't have the time. I actually have inputs on what I think, how the message should be reframed, because I think there are areas where we stubbed our toes, and we can avoid that in the future. And I want to echo what Commissioner Bozievich said, and by the way, he was so, I'm going to hear about this. He was so upset with the outcome of the election that he sanctioned himself for several days talking to anyone about it. And I felt the same way about him. No, about me too. So I just want to say that, and in an environment where we are competing with unbelievable amounts of needs that require structures, right, from homelessness to housing to this to that, it makes it a difficult environment. I remember 40-some years ago when I was a teacher and the cuts were starting to be made in education, and teachers just gritted on. I mean, and paying out of their own pockets for materials that used to be provided. And the public was not aware of how desperate the classroom situation was. And I think we and you find yourselves in the same position now. So longer campaign, reconsideration of messaging, truly listening to the public. Now, unlike Devin, I did not solicit public feedback. But being one of the poster people for this courthouse bond request, I received a ton of it. And I think the listening to the public and organizing a request that embraces the integrity of what's needed but demonstrates listening to the public will make the difference between a yes and a no vote moving forward.
Commissioner?
When I went out and talked to constituents after the election, there was an interesting dichotomy. The people that voted no were pretty vocal and actually proactively giving feedback as to why they felt it didn't pass. But they were also simultaneously asking, when are you going to come down and talk about it again? When are you going to get out in the community and have more meetings about it? Which told me that although they may have initially said no, they're still very interested in the project as a whole and wanted to hear more, and maybe they just didn't feel as included initially as they should have been. And so all summer long, I've been hearing, particularly in South Lane, that they really want us to come back out and talk more about it and get their input. And what that may turn out to be, who knows? It may mean it's a different design. Maybe it's just information that they didn't hear about initially. But they are asking me when. And I would love to be able to share this with them and say, we'll be out again soon. Let's talk about it more. And what's your feedback? So I look forward to that part. So I support moving ahead with your timeline, particularly in the case of the community outreach, which I'm sure everybody is on board that we need some really robust outreach again. And you touched on this, Judge, that the Lane County Legislative Delegation really went to bat for us to get that match money. And they really want to see us succeed. But it's really up to us as a county to make that happen. They've done everything that they could at the state level at this point. And whatever we can do now will make or break the success of this particular project. I'm on board for support. I know it's needed. I know you see it every day. I don't get to see it every day. But I'm there with you, and I'll continue to be supportive as much as possible.
Commissioner Farr?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Judge Vogt, Sheriff, DA Perlow, thank you for being here. Devin, great presentation on the after-action report. I have two messages, one of despair and one of hope. The one of despair is, last year I was a juror, and I was selected against all common sense. I was selected to serve on the jury. Now, is anybody familiar with the Henry Fonda movie? You all are, right? 12 Angry Men. It'd have been far angrier in the jury room that I was in. You know, it's cramped quarters. If one person in the back has to go to the bathroom, everybody has to clear the room. There's no way you could deliberate efficiently or really judiciously in a room like that. That's only a small part of the need for the courthouse. And I'm not going to rehash some of the things that Commissioner Bozovich has said and others have said. We do need the courthouse for a host of reasons, not just the jury, but anybody who has experienced business in the courthouse. I'm still on the despair message, by the way. Anybody who's experienced business in the courthouse knows that it's inadequate, whether you are a judge, a DA, or a sheriff's deputy, or whether you've been charged with a crime, or you're a witness to a crime, or if you're going there for a restraining order. Whatever it is you're going there on business for, you understand that it's not working very well at all. Right from the moment you get checked in, where sometimes the line goes out the door, or if in the jury room downstairs, you have to go outside and come back in because we don't have an accessible courthouse, accessible from the public service building. All those reasons are a part of the message of despair. We have to have it, it has to happen, and people really do need to understand why we have to have a new courthouse. If you have not experienced it, then it becomes incumbent upon us to describe it in a way that people can taste it. Describe it in a salient way where people can understand what it feels like to try to do business, whatever your business may be inside of the courthouse. Now, here's my message of hope, and it is a message of hope. I've been on different elective bodies where we've built buildings. We built Prairie Mountain School and Kalapuya High School. We built Meadowview School. Now, more recently for me, we built a new library, the Eugene Downtown Library. We also built Station 2, which is the large fire station over on 2nd Avenue. It's also a regional training station. Both very large public projects. Both got slapped in the face the first time we asked for them. And so with the library, it's a large library with 4 floors. What we did with the city was, some folks were with the city at the time, we stepped back and asked, well, what can we do to make this more appealing to the people who have to say yes on it? And we identified where was it that people didn't say yes, and how can we reach out and find ways to get into their living room and have them taste and feel what the library was going to be like. It's a little bit easier with the fire department because it's easier to picture a fire. But if you don't use a library, if you live in Bethel, for instance, and you don't come downtown for whatever reason, then there's no reason to understand why you need a library. So we scaled it back a little bit. The 4th floor, we changed it to be a temporary office space, not part of the library, but expandable when we needed the library to expand. And significantly, a large cadre of people called the Eugene Library Foundation got involved. And they got out and they went into people's living rooms, and they were able to talk in terms that people understood and make people understand and believe in the library. And we added things that made it more appealing to more people. For instance, if you go to the library, there's a children's garden. That was donated to us by the Tribes of Grand Ronde, a beautiful children's garden. It appealed to more people because they could see their kids in there. So yes, we have to go back out for the courthouse. We have to do it. The library actually, Joe, didn't take 2 swings. It took 3 swings before we got the library. And Bethel never did say yes, by the way. But that being said, we did pass the library on the third go-around because we made it appeal to more people, and we made people understand it, taste it, and feel it even more. So that's what it becomes for us. We need to put it out. We can scale it down however it may be scaled down or may not be scaled down at all. If there are ways to make it less expensive as far as the presentation and the flow inside, we can look at that. But I think, and I hope, and I expect that we did all of that. We made it as efficient as we possibly could. So we have to go out with something pretty similar to what we went out with last time, but we have to get more people to understand the return on their investment. If they think it's too costly, we need to explain, as DA Perlow just did, the flow, the security, and all of the things that need to occur. If they think it's too high taxes, well, we have to explain what the alternative is to an efficient and working justice system. And we have to get we have to get more people in people's living rooms. I'm confident, that's my message of optimism. I am optimistic that like the city of Eugene, like the library, like Station 2 and other fire stations that we build, we can go out and appeal to people in a way that they'll understand. You talk in terms they understand. In private life, I built a few other buildings. As Jerry's went from 8 employees to what you see today, we went through a lot of iterations, but we didn't have to convince people. They came and told us we needed to build. That's a different situation. Here, we have to convince people that the return on their investment, their substantial investment that we're going to ask them to make, is going to be a worthwhile return on that investment. We can do it, and I think we have lessons all around us that will help us identify how we can do it.
Thank you. In my first round of questions and comments, I asked and said a few things, and I just want to add a few more things. One is that I think that the number of polls that were done was insufficient for the gravity of the decision that we're going to make the next time. In other words, if we do this one poll and say, well, what did you like? Well, we liked several things. What did you like? What you dislike? We disliked the price. We disliked the amount. If that's the state of the polling, then there really isn't more information. I would really advocate for more information, and colleagues of mine, friends of mine that do public opinion polling will suggest that you cannot really draw a line through one point. Okay, you need to have at least two, and you'll get more accuracy if you have more points where you ask questions in different ways. One important question, I think, is does the public know that the $87 million match likely goes away in the future? I'm not sure that was going to be explained, or if the public now knows that if something is put on the ballot in 2021 or 2020 or 21, do they understand that after that point it's highly unlikely that our legislative delegation will be able to keep the nearly $90 million of match? Another thing is that public awareness, and we focused on how maybe the rural areas voted no and South Eugene voted yes, but I contend that the yes vote was actually quite diminished in South Eugene. And if we consider, and I'm just saying we, meaning the planners, the work that's going on between now and the end of the timeline, consider some of the other related public safety issues, including mental health and substance abuse, and the people affected by that, and whether or not we're going to be able to do something about it. Then the concept of a hybrid bond or a construction bond that is adding to our capacity to deal with those problems could be, and I don't say it is, but I say could be, a reason for people that were prone to vote yes, who voted yes, but who would have voted yes in much higher numbers. So I'm looking at that and hoping that that can be examined, the concept of a hybrid bond, and the pros and cons. And then last but not least, I think that the outreach and education has to come from people other than those of us that work in government. It has to be the crime victim, it has to be the juror, the ex-jurors, it has to be people whose lives are, and they're aware of what they've seen, and it is their opinion, their view, that something should be done about it. And I know that that was done in the political campaign, but I'm not sure that the county's materials really were taking the stories of those people, because I think that is extremely powerful. And I personally have seen this in the courthouse as a victim advocate to see how victims are treated in the current setting of the victim and perpetrator being pretty much in the same physical space. So I'd love to see whatever outreach we're doing, we think about, well, who's telling the story? If it's an architect that's explaining why we made the changes, that's one method of telling the story. It's another thing to have the victims describe what their experiences have been. So, I would say for me, I've got to see a lot more public opinion analysis Because if it's just a matter of throwing it back, maybe we would do that, but maybe we would do that later. So if it's just a matter of asking again. But I'm very open and would love to see some additional scaled down proposals. And that may be something that you're going to build into the work plan. So anyone else on a second round? Commissioner?
Just briefly, many people I've spoken with did not differentiate. They did not understand the public service building is a different building. Just, I also think built into any campaign ought to include listening sessions, and I think each commissioner ought to, with many of you, participate and convene those listening sessions in their respective districts. If we're gonna go to bat, we should go to bat. And I think that Commissioner Farr's idea of a Friends of group to develop now while there's time is an absolutely excellent idea. Those are the only statements I wanted to make.
Okay, anyone else want to make any other comments? Okay, good. Well, thank you. This has been very worthwhile. Thank you so much, Ms. Ashridge, for your report and for our elected officials coming and discussing this with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are hoping, now I see Mr. Manella here. Is everybody for your presentation here? Okay, so we have a time certain at 3 o'clock. Yours is set for 30 minutes. You want to go now? Okay, come on up. We'll have item 12A. This is our discussion and update on the 2019 and 2020 winter shelter strategies. And with us today is Steve Manella. And Mr. Manella, if you could introduce the folks at the table for the benefit of the viewing audience, that'd be great.
Sure. Good afternoon, Commissioners. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Bob Sorrento, who has been with Lane County for about 2 months and is our new homeless and supportive housing supervisor. He comes to us from Southern California, where he managed a number of different continuums of care and homeless programs in both some California cities and counties. And we're very pleased to have him working with us. I'm Steve Manella. I'm the manager of the Human Services Division at the county.
Dan Hurley, Public Works Director.
Great. So I will introduce the item, and then Bob will lead us through the slide show. So this is a presentation today on winter strategies for this winter. We have a board item next week where we'll be covering the recommendations of the TAC report and giving you an update on the implementation plan, as well as talking about the Eugene mission and a presentation from the Eugene mission. So this is an opportunity just to focus on this very narrow area of work that we're doing amongst all the area of work that we're doing on homelessness and supportive housing.
Thank you, Mr. Manella. Chair Sorensen and Commissioners, thank you for this opportunity to present to you what Lane County is working on in terms of what we call our winter strategies. What I wanted to do first is provide a context that I'm sure you're familiar with. This is just population demographics regarding Lane County. You can see the overall population in the 3 largest cities in the county, where the concentration of people who are unhoused we can find. So these 3 cities represent about 65% of the population of the total county. This measure you're also aware of. You've seen the report regarding the point-in-time count from January 30th, 2019. When I look at this data and other data related to Lane County, what it tells me is a picture of the extent of human suffering in the community. I was doing a bit of research in terms of some other indicators of that measure, and we know that the poverty rate from the American Community Survey from 2017 revealed a poverty rate of about 19%, 18.8% in the county. And being new to the region and coming to this place and enjoying the beauty of this place, this level of suffering has been a bit of a surprise to me. I mean, I looked at the data before I came here, and I'm trying to figure out, well, what's this about? And so one of the things I considered is that this community has a relatively large, predominantly a white population, and also this beautiful environment. And typically, in my experience, when I go to communities that are predominantly white and in these beautiful environments, people are usually doing really well, generally speaking, relatively speaking. And I looked at, from that same survey in 2017, the poverty rate of the white population in Lane County, and it's also relatively high, almost 20%. So that tells me there's something different about this community. There's some underlying factors that cause this human suffering in a way that we don't see typically, not only here in Oregon, but on the West Coast, when I like to say from Seattle to San Diego. So that's one of the things that's on my mind as a new person. What are these underlying structures that cause this level of suffering? So when we consider what we're doing in terms of emergency shelter, there are a few organizations, nonprofits in the community that have been serving well in this community, people who are unhoused. You see the Eugene Mission, St. Vincent de Paul Shelter Care, and Looking Glass. And those agencies, they serve different populations, and in all, they make available about 450 beds per night. The Eugene Mission represents the majority of the lion's share of that, with 320 beds for families, for women, for men. And in recent years, St. Vincent de Paul has increased its capacity to serve families. There was the transition of the interfaith shelter to First Place Family, the annex, and now we serve what used to be 30, now 60 beds for families. And Looking Glass, as you know, is the youth shelter in our community, with a capacity of about 12 individuals per evening. We have this, what I see as a unique response to homelessness. In my experience in Southern California, I don't see the kind of support from the public elected official level that I have seen here in Lane County, in Eugene, and Springfield, especially for what's called alternative shelter. And staff at Human Services, they're very particular about reminding me that these alternative camps and sleeping accommodations, HUD does not consider them emergency shelter. You're aware of that, because they don't meet housing quality standards. However, what I see is a community, given the scarcity of affordable housing, is trying to respond in whatever way possible from a humane level to try to get people off the street. So even though I've also been working in this field since 1999, I would agree that these are not ideal in terms of housing quality standards. I do see that this is the effort that this community is trying to make to do something to alleviate this human suffering that I described earlier. St. Vincent de Paul opened Dusk to Dawn as a seasonal shelter in 2018, and you remember what happened last winter with Highway 99. And now that service is a year-round service. It's increased the capacity to 192 individuals per night. We also know that the city of Eugene has a municipal code that allows for sleeping or camps, overnight camping, 42 locations serving 60 individual slots. And St. Vincent de Paul also stepped up in this way to help manage those sites with checks, monitoring, and also a screening process. So people have to go to the service station to receive those services. And those services also, those locations also provide restroom and trash. Also, for the city of Eugene, businesses and churches are the primary locations of these car camping sites. We also have, the county has funded what we call seasonal alternative camps. So during the winter months from November through March, we've made available 20 spaces. Again, St. Vincent de Paul, the manager of that program. It's also known as safe parking. In 2019, a winter strategies coordinator was hired to manage that program, Tim Black. And they're currently working on seeking sites throughout the community, and in Springfield, there's a site that's recently been identified to add to that opportunity. I think I skipped something. I wanted to go back here. Let's see. No, I think I'm there. The next slide talks about a program that is also, in my estimation, a measure of the kind of support that this community rallies behind in ways that I haven't seen in other communities. And the reason I say that is this program called the Eagan Warming Center is primarily composed of volunteers who are mobilized when temperatures reach freezing, and an activation on a relatively short notice of volunteers. Primarily, I'm told they are older adults. And in many cases, although we provide training for them, they don't have the level of training needed to address the acuity of needs that we're seeing. So one of the things I find heartening about this community is a level of commitment that individuals make to try to make a difference, one person at a time. And at the same time, it also is concerning that we don't have enough resources at this point to provide more paid staff to fully address the acute needs that are in the community. This last slide talks about some opportunities that are pending. The state of Oregon is currently examining a $5 million project to address in a couple of ways the need. There is approximately $1.5 million statewide that will be made available for winter warming programs. 10 Oregon jurisdictions will be awarded about $149,000 each to coordinate with the local continuum of care programs, their winter warming strategies. One possibility is that funding could be used to further support the Eagan program that was just mentioned. And then there will be a separate request for proposal for shelters, emergency shelters, throughout the state, with $3.5 million available for that funding. We do have some potential opportunities that you've been working with the City of Eugene that may be an appropriate applicant. And we also have had a request from Commissioner Farr regarding what could be done with public facilities, including county parks. And so county parks did an analysis of those, and perhaps our colleague here, Dan Hurley, might be able to speak to that. But essentially, there was a couple of locations that were identified that have hosts. The downside to them is they're not very near adjacent human services, although it might be appropriate for individuals who do not have high acuity and high needs for services. So that's a possibility. And then finally, at a recent meeting of the Poverty and Homelessness Board, the Youth Homeless Services Work Group presented recommendations regarding how to address the unmet need for transitional age youth. These are young people 18 to 24. And one of their primary recommendations is a center, overnight shelter from the months of October to February that would provide basic needs and shelter for that population. That concludes our report.
Okay, we'll have discussion and comments. Commissioner Farr.
So, Bob, in the 2 years since you got here, it's pretty remarkable how you've identified some of the things that we've been working on for a long, long time. I love your words. It's heartening the level of commitment that you see not just in the community, but also in the staff. And I'm looking at Mr. Manella and the staff that Mr. Manella works with. But we've been working on this for a lot of years, pushing the ball uphill, and the issue continues to grow. You know, the high level of awareness that you describe that we have to the conditions surrounding homelessness becomes even more frustrating when we're unable to address them on a continuous basis. That being said, Mr. Manella, you remember, I think it was 7 years ago, we sat in November wondering what our winter strategies were going to be. And we came up with kind of a hodgepodge of small things, many of which are continuing to this day. So we're ahead of it. At least we're thinking about it ahead of time. This late September now, we're just getting a report. We're not deciding what to do. We're getting a report on what we are going to be doing. But that being said, finding ways to use our available resources without having to tap more resources to put our best foot forward and use and get people housed. I understand Mr. Hurley has some suggestions regarding public land for the overnight camping program, and I'm anxious to hear about that. But, you know, 4 years ago, I started talking about the Armory, for instance. Now, people continue to look at me and say, how come you've not done something with the Armory? How come the Armory is a big, dry building? You know, there isn't a leak in the place, and it's something that we can use. We had a provider came in and said that they would put the money in to fix the HVAC system, and we could use it that winter. That was 3 winters ago. But conditions surround that, and I'd like to hear just a little bit about what are the conditions that surround some of our existing facilities that make it so we cannot use them in short notice. And Mr. Mokrowski, the Armory, I know you can respond to that. We have other facilities also. Public Works has open space and land. We have the parks that do have restrooms and various amenities where people with less acuity, I think is the expression you used, could stay. People who are relatively self-sufficient don't need daily services downtown. So why can't we use those facilities more? So to me, that's the big question. That's the one hanging out here. And Bob, you said I've asked for use of more public land. Let's talk about that a little bit right now, because I'm still simmering on that one.
Well, I don't know how much time we have, but I'll attempt to answer the question. I had this conversation with Mr. McAllister, who's in the audience here yesterday, and I expressed to him, you know, an understanding of the frustration of our community partners who come forward and say, you have a vacant building. Why can't we have this proposal, we'll operate it. Why can't you just let us in and do this? It shouldn't be that hard. And I certainly, we understand that frustration. I think often as government, we're required to live by certain rules and regulations and codes. And so we look at these things and we go, it's never as easy as it's just that building, let us in. So we've done the Armory as an example, Commissioner Farr, I think it's a good example. We've had a few of these, the Armory, the Surbu Pod, where very well-meaning individuals who are doing important work at the ground level in the community ask something that seems easy and simple. And the further we get into it, it actually is much more complex. In the case of the Armory, we've had to significantly scale back on what the original desired use for that facility was, which was contemplated as more of a shelter opportunity. We've had to scale it back because the cost of the improvements to that building to allow people to be sheltered there were just cost prohibitive, particularly when we believe we have a longer term use for that property. So I think there's an important learning, there's an opportunity for us to learn. We talked about listening and learning on the last item. I think here as well, that we need to come together, and oftentimes we, the county, are in the position of responding to an interest of a community partner. And we need to be, I think, more collaborative in that process where we're trying to understand what the community partners desire to do, and we identify opportunities. It may be that the Armory, we're going to tour another property this afternoon because we actually think there might be a better property to do some of the things that are now proposed at the Armory for less cost. So there's an element of creativity and collaboration and patience that has to be inserted into all of this and an understanding of the various perspectives. So I'm giving you a long and kind of winding answer because it's not simple. And I think the important thing is that we keep in mind that just because we think we have a solution in our mind, that solution may or may not be the right thing. We need to be open to alternatives. So in this case, you know, parks was put out. Why can't we just use parks to shelter people? Well, there are a number of challenges with that. What Mr. Hurley has done and his team and Brett Henry and Parks have said is, we have some concerns about specific parks being used because there are a lot of conflicts being created. However, let's identify another solutions. When we talk about being focused on solutions, that's really what we mean.
Well, thank you. And that really wasn't that whining of a description. And really what I wanted you to say out loud was some of the challenges that we face in using public lands. It's not as it might seem. You can't just turn the key and open the door. There are many other considerations to take into account, and it takes time to make things happen. Now, last year, Mr. McChrysky, you and I and Mr. Dingle, I listened to the conversation. We stood in my office upstairs at about 9 o'clock in the morning talking about what can we do to alleviate the camping issue downtown. And I think by 5 o'clock that afternoon, I have pictures of you shoving toilets around out on Camp 99, and we'd solved that issue. We hadn't solved it, but we'd displace that issue in a single day. We can act fast when the cards are right, when the temperature is right. And that's what we need to seek, is when can we get it to the point where the temperature is right so we can act fast to make things happen. We still have lots and lots of people on the street. I don't need to remind the board of that. Everybody reminds us of that on a regular basis. We don't need to just beat that to death. But that being said, the Poverty and Homelessness Board has a Shelter and Supportive Housing Development Committee that has a kind of a hovering charge right now. And that committee consists of some high-level policymakers from nonprofits and from the city of Eugene, for instance, that can ask questions and reasonably hope for answers. And so one of the questions that we will ask is, what are public lands, not just county, but city, but EWEB and other public lands that potentially could be identified for an intermediate or interim source of relief for the people who otherwise tonight will be very, very cold and wet. And once we get into October, the Eagan Warming Center is open at 31 degrees. Well, I'd rather be 31 and dry than 37 and wringing wet through, you know, so it doesn't address all of our issues. So, Bob, you've been here and you've got a taste for the way things are here. You say it's a predominantly white population. It is. And our schools, our high schools are graduating predominantly white graduates. That's the nature of the population here. We continue to have more people needing housing, and more people needing immediate and emergency housing. So focusing our attention, continuing to focus our attention on it is something that we are doing, and we are taking steps along the way. Part of my discussion today is just to let people know that we are ahead of where we were years ago, miles behind where we all know we need to be. We're not ignorant of the fact that we're not addressing the need. So I'd love to hear what other commissioners have to say about it, and I may have a couple more words before we sign off.
Okay, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you for going through each of the programs. I'm very familiar with all of the programs that you mentioned, and I know that people come here to kind of explore the types of programs we do here that are unknown to other parts of the United States or even other parts of our state. The bottom line, though, is it's still not enough. It's not going to do it, and we're going to continue to hear it from the public, especially when we have people run over in an alleyway in the middle of the morning because they're just sleeping everywhere. They have no other place to be. So we have to continue to move the needle and not just lull that we have these good programs in place and that's all we can do, because we have to do more, especially in rural Lane County. They don't have access to many of these programs that are currently listed. And they don't know how to do them in the small communities or even the unincorporated communities. And we need to be able to help them replicate some of these that they can actually do and utilize in their own locations and be able to connect those resources. Right now, it feels very disconnected from the metro center to the rural communities. But it's just as important there and even maybe more prevalent in rural Lane County than what we see here. And I've been really contemplating, a lot of people debate whether people are moving here for services, whether they're from here, which we know majority of people are actually from here. But what they're trying to seek is, where do we plug this hole? How do we plug this hole? And as I've been meeting with people in the community this summer, one of the points that I'm really feeling needs attention is the fact that of those beds, only a fraction of them are for youth. Minors, homeless minors. And that's the pipeline into adult homelessness. And that's a hole that we really need to plug, because no minor deserves to be on the street by themselves in a homeless situation. It's just purely, absolutely something that's unacceptable. And we have to be able to know, where can we house those folks? You touched on the Sorrento pod. Can you give any update on that? Because it's my understanding that was going to serve some youth.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Buck, the proposal there was working with the 15th Night Collaborative to identify improvements that would need to be made to one of the, we actually have 2 vacant pods at the Sorrento, in the Sorrento building, the salmon pod and the green pod, to be used for a youth homeless shelter. So this would not be a detention, but it would be for a shelter for youth. There's currently, as I understand, only one youth shelter in Lane County that's operated by Looking Glass at the same campus, at our MLK campus. So we have been working with an architectural firm. We have in identifying, very similarly to the Armory project, what improvements need to be made. That is set up as a detention facility. And so now we're talking about retrofitting what's a vacant building and can be used for some purpose, but it was purposely built as a detention facility. We're now talking about converting it into a homeless shelter for youth. And the Phoenix program, which was our treatment program, used to operate out of one of those pods, which is why there are now 2 vacant pods. We intentionally moved the Phoenix program to a non-secured facility because the state required it, because the building that they were in, the pod that they were in, did not meet state requirements because of those youth are not in detention. So this is all to say that there's likely a sizable investment that will, I should say there will be a sizable investment that will be required to retrofit the pod to make it available for use in that way. We believe we'll have the cost estimates by the end of this week, at which point we would issue an RFP for a service provider to submit a proposal to the county. We would then work with that service provider, execute an agreement, and a timeline moving forward. Hope that answers the question.
That's great to hear. I look forward to talking about how we can utilize that a lot more. I'd also like to see us, at the county level, work with cities around the county on how they can help house their youth. We know that they're not going to move to the city center. They'll stay there, they'll camp, and just exist, but not really living. And I would like to know what we can do to make sure that not only are we focused on housing youth locally in the Metro Center, but how we can help assist our small communities to do that as well. And that also includes resources, which we all know we're in desperate need of for all of this whole subject we're talking about today. But for them, that resource looks very different.
Okay, Commissioner Burney, Commissioner Bozovich, then Commissioner Burney.
Sure. Heather, you kind of, I was writing notes here. One of them was use of pod and youth, particular, but yeah.
He accused you of plagiarism.
Yeah. Commissioner Sorensen is probably tired of hearing me talk about this because he's served with me the longest, and I think I've been hammering this since I became a commissioner. There's only 50 to 100 youth on the street in Lane County on any particular night. It's not the 2,000 person lift. It's a much smaller lift we could deal with. And the studies have shown, and I've been talking about 15th night before there was a 15th night organization in Lane County, that if you get these youth off the street before they've been on the street more than 2 weeks, they're less likely to become chronically homeless as adults. But if they spend that 15th night on the street, they're 80% more likely to be chronically homeless as an adult. It is turning off the tap. And it is, those strategies around youth in particular are about resolving the long-term homeless problem. Our paper's been running a series on ACEs. How big of an ACE is being homeless? When you talk about what happens to folks in adult life, ACE, adverse childhood experience, for those watching on TV. That to me is where if I'm going to focus our limited resources on one thing, I want to try and fix that youth issue first. And then that gets to another issue that's going to be a little bit controversial, which is, are some of the strategies we do for winter strategies enabling, or are they helping? Are they actually helping people out of their situation of homelessness, or are they just helping prolong their situation?
Can I answer that for you?
Can I finish my sentence?
Sure.
And I'll let you speak, but my concern is some of this, may allow somebody to live, maybe not freeze to death or something, but we're not attaching any case management very well with some of these services in some of the proposals that I hear. The advocates that want us to purely just open up a campsite like we did at Highway 99, we kind of found out that without strict rules, without interference, without case management, things kind of go sideways in that sort of camp situation. So we need to think about what services we're going to do as winter strategies, because whatever we spend here is something we're not spending on something that can, like the Fuse project, where there is long-term hope involved, where we're attaching intensive case management to housing first style housing.
Commissioner Bosevich, we have enhanced the case management services for dusk to dawn this winter, but what I would tell you, and this is the greater issue that we deal with that we're trying to work on as part of our restructuring of the homeless system and better meeting the needs of those that are homeless, is the onslaught of the complexity of the people that we're working with. If we could find solutions to put dying people into hospice, if we could find solutions for people who are eligible, the 60-plus people who are eligible for nursing level care at senior and disabled services, who are both mentally ill, have substance abuse problems, and need to be in some sort of a skilled nursing facility, if we could find places for people who are not ambulatory, who are in wheelchairs, who need some sort of housing that will fit their needs. So this is a complexity of what we're dealing with, and what groups like St. Vincent de Paul are dealing with at Dusk to Dawn. And if we can find solutions for some of the folks who are actually eligible for public benefits, and there's operating money for those programs, but those facilities don't exist, then we could concentrate our efforts on those people whose lives could be reclaimed, and we could focus our efforts more.
Yeah, I agree, and it's just a concern of mine, because one of the things on that list of overnight beds we didn't show there was how many people are in Willamette Families Buckley and Detox Center.
Oh, yeah.
How many people are in the jail or the muni jails around this county overnight? How many people are in the emergency room? Those are temporary beds we're providing right now to this segment of our population in the wintertime. So, that just, people have to remember that a little bit. But I get a lot of concern from folks that are concerned about our balance in holding people responsible for some of their behaviors. And the fact that there are people that will take advantage of these systems, I'm not saying it's every homeless person, that are not dealing with the underlying addiction and criminality behaviors that come with that are staying in our winter shelter, because, or participating in some place that doesn't require them to be clean. And that's not helping those folks, and allows them to go further down the road of addiction, further changes in their brain chemistry and brain pathways, harder to rehabilitate in the long run. Is that really helping those people? If we're not starting to think about holding people somewhat responsible for the behaviors that come with that, and using the leverage of holding them responsible to force them into things like our mental health and our drug court, and dealing with, or getting into our downward departure program, our 416, which we just had great data on the recidivism rates on that. Those things change people's lives. Putting somebody in a overnight situation so they can survive a night, but continue down being addicted and doing a lot of repetitive property crime, I don't know if that's helping. And then it also is impacting people that are, regular, honest citizens in this county. I have constituents that will not come to downtown Eugene anymore. So, yeah, and I'm being told that on a regular basis. And I'm a little concerned with the world's coming up, of what we're going to present to the world.
Okay, Commissioner, do you want to make some remarks? Have you done? Are you done, or did you want to make?
I haven't started yet. How could I be done?
Okay, well, we're not done. We're only on the first round.
I'm sorry. How many rounds are we?
As many as we need.
Bob, how do I pronounce your last name?
Sorrento.
Sorrento.
Yes.
So welcome to our community, Mr. Sorrento.
Thank you. I'm really enjoying it.
May I ask what communities you've done this type of work?
So I've worked for the city of Anaheim, in the Community Services Department, for the County of Orange in the Orange County Human Relations Commission, for the city of Long Beach as the lead for the homeless continuum of care. And I did about a year work in the County of Ventura in child welfare as a senior program manager.
Thank you. Sure. I'm very familiar with all of those counties.
Very good.
And yes, this county is a tad less diverse, but speaks about diversity all the time.
My experience has been an incredibly welcoming place.
Yes. So welcome. I think that what you're sensing is a tremendous amount of desire from this different members of this elected body who have fundamentally different backgrounds. And I think the person who has the most hands-on experience in this arena on this commission is Commissioner Buck, just letting you know. She's certainly my bellwether as it relates to this topic. My background is the most recently in business, and honest to God, and forgive me for saying this, but what I want to say, but I know it will carry no weight. Well, before I say it, does this community, do we have in Lane County an inventory on all abandoned or boarded up buildings?
So, Commissioner, are you asking county-owned?
No.
Abandoned, or you're saying any?
Yes.
I'm not aware that we do. We certainly can inquire with the assessor. I'm trying to think who would have that, a database. I'm not sure that we do, but we can inquire on that.
Well,
HUD keeps a database on foreclosures that are abandoned, and then they make them available for resale.
Okay.
Residential?
Yeah, residential, yeah.
I don't know. I don't pretend to know, but it might be an idea worth pursuing to warehouse buildings, large commercial spaces, et cetera, just to know what the inventory of unused dry space is in this county, in rural communities too. And if I had a magic wand, or if this was a business, I would say, I want 500 beds in 60 days to be made available on an emergency temporary basis. If in fact we declare that housing is an emergency, and I'm saying this as a point way out there, I know it's not possible, but I would love to see us waive rules, regulation, temporarily, rules, regulations, requirements as it relates to sheltering people. We could have disclaimers that they could sign if it's not seismically up to snuff or doesn't meet requirements. But at some point in time, I think that we will, I don't know, I'm starting to feel like Chris feels sometimes, which is we talk about it, but we really, really, really need to, where the rubber hits the road, even if it's temporary and doesn't meet zoning requirements, establish emergency waivers to provide space for people. And then finally, I don't understand why the Armory can't be made available on a temporary basis. Forgive me, I don't, at least for this winter, as we're figuring out a long-term use. And as I recall, when we did discuss the Armory for perhaps Health and Human Services, I did make the statement that I'd like to put a flag on there that until it's used for that purpose, if that's the will of the board, that we do enable people that are homeless during the winter months to have shelter there. I'm frustrated with that, but I know that there are rules and requirements and regulations, but it's hard. And so I share with you, sir, new to our community, that I joined this board from different perspectives with a concern for the most vulnerable and needy among us. And after immediate needs are met, ironically, I gravitate to some of Commissioner Bozovich's concerns, which has to do with personal responsibility. I'm sorry, it's a statement. It doesn't beg an answer unless you want to.
No, I mean, Shara, I was just going to answer the Armory question. And again, I think we all understand the frustration because you see a building that seems like it should be able to be utilized. That building, I believe, was built in the 70s, so it's around 50 years old. It hasn't been occupied for a decade or so. And so if you're going to shelter people, you're literally going to put people in there for a shelter purpose. The city code requires improvements to the HVAC system, to the sprinkler system, for fire prevention or fire mitigation. Those things all come with costs. And so that's where we run into these issues, and that was where the original desire was to use that facility for shelter, but the cost of the improvements that are required by the city code, in this case, City of Eugene code, for health and safety, for life and safety related needs, were deemed cost prohibitive.
So the elected officials of the City of Eugene and the elected officials of the County of Lane cannot temporarily waive that in an emergency. Okay.
The city building code comes from the state, and we're not able to waive that.
Thanks, Dan.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Mr. Sorrento for your passion and willingness to work here in Lane County. I personally want to comment that words like suffering are not easy to hear, but I think it's really refreshing that mental health, housing, social service professionals will be using direct language like that so the people in the public know what we're talking about. I did want to review briefly one of the arithmetic questions I was trying to answer is if we have 450 people at one level of shelter or housing, and we have another 380 of people who are basically unauthorized, not unauthorized housing, but authorized camping. My math is it's 830. The one-time count, point-in-time count, 2165. Where are the other 1,335 people? And that's a hypothetical because we don't know that today it's 1,335, but roughly where are those 1,000 people in the system?
Well, the point-in-time count showed on that night there were 1,600 folks who were unsheltered, so they're out in the streets someplace.
Yeah, and my number was 1,335.
Right,
so
that's
yeah,
pretty close.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Another question I have is, the other day, that was a while back, but I went to Lane Community College and I looked for their shelter, because they are a shelter under the St. Vincent de Paul program, where they operate evening to morning homeless shelter in one room at LCC. So I actually went there just to see what kind of room is this. And basically, it's a large classroom, about maybe half the size of this, not the volume, but the square footage of this building. And there's a bunch of mats that people lay on at night. And they have to, there's a sign, I can't remember the hours, but it was like, we don't open until 8, and you got to be out here by 6 or something like that. And I was just wondering, in terms of, and Commissioner Burney asked a great question, well, what is the inventory of space? But what if we got more aggressive about this and said, okay, we've got this room right here that's not used between typically 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. or maybe 10:30 and 7:30, I'm not sure. What if we use this room, or what if we use the hallways in the public service building, or what if we use the cafeteria that hasn't been used for a year at this point? And these are all places where there's bathrooms nearby, where there's security typically. What could we do something about this 1,300 to 1,600 people per night if we approach the Cottage Grove schools or the Cottage Grove City Council or the Springfield City Government? I was over there for a meeting on a Saturday morning. I was just taking how big their open area is, covered and heated open area is over there. Do we have that kind of inventory where we could reach out to people and try to do something on the short term? And this is also a follow-up to the armory, but we've already got all these spaces that are being heated and are dry. Now, are they housing, as HUD would use the word? No, they're not. But it's something more than what we're able to do. Have you looked into this, Steve, or is this something we have an inventory, or we could do that?
Yeah, I think that what we're trying to build into our longer-term strategy is to have the staffing with the new SIM, the Strategic Initiatives staff, to be able to do that kind of inventory of sites and spaces or buildings or things for the future. The things that typically get into our way as sites are identified are the kinds of things that Steve and Dan mentioned that are the city building codes, and then the compatibility.
Would the city building code prohibit what I described, where there's hallways at the city of Springfield City Hall or in the Lane County Public Service Building? Could we use that as a site?
What happens is that you get into a residential use, and in a residential use of that nature, then there are some additional requirements that the building code has. And we toured a facility that was owned by Peace Health that they're preparing to demolish. And we toured that with City of Eugene engineers and other folks, and we found that, again, with that facility, it required some significant improvements in order to make it occupiable under current building codes. So that is, so that sort of a project, if we have a lead time and we can identify sites that are appropriate, that, then we have to look at whether or not there's going to be a cost to modifying the space for residential occupancy.
Yeah, this is somewhat a shift in my questions, but I have a concern that even though we are known maybe anecdotally for being a wet, cold place in the winter and a dry, warm place in the summer, it's my view that we're actually getting a much colder winter and a much hotter summer. And I actually have concerns on the other end of this whole continuum, namely that physicians are telling people to stay indoors in July and August. They're telling people don't go outside, the air is too thick with smoke, it's too hot, old people die when it gets too hot. And I just remember when I was in my early 20s, mid-20s, I worked in Washington, D.C. for 5 years, and the big city mayors in Baltimore and Philadelphia would be saying, you know, we're going to put these old people in school cafeterias. We're going to put, because we don't want them to die on the street because they don't have enough water or don't have a place. And I'm wondering what kind of strategy, I know this is called winter strategies, but what about summer strategies to deal with people that are also homeless and don't have places to go during these high temperature days?
Yeah, that's been a discussion in the community, particularly the concern with fires in previous years with air quality. And so there have been a number of people who've gotten together around that. There hasn't been any kind of plan of action that has been put in place. And, you know, I'll go back to what I mentioned earlier. You know, this isn't only a housing crisis, it's a healthcare crisis. You know, some of the description of the folks that I mentioned, I think Commissioner Bosevich mentioned the link between, you know, mental illness, substance abuse, and some of the issues. So, you know, the thing is that what we can do is that we can do better than we're doing. You know, Commissioner Farr mentioned that every year, you know, incrementally we are doing more. And I think we look forward next week to give you an update on what we're doing to make some of those long-term system improvements. And I think the idea with that is that you know, we have an aggressive plan that within 3 to 5 years we can do something much better than we're doing today.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I've gone over my time, and we've gone over our board time here, so I think we'll thank our panel, and especially Mr. Manella and Mr. Hurley and Mr. Sorrento for being here, and thanks so much for making the presentation and fielding some of the questions. Really appreciate it. Keep up your good work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we're going to call up another group of folks, and Dan Hurley, Alex Kyler, Austin Ramirez, Ben Boss, or did I pronounce your name? Bosse. Okay, very good. And so I'll read the item, 13A, while you guys are getting situated. This is a discussion in the matter of the Goshen Industrial Area. With us to discuss this is Dan Hurley, Public Works Director, Alex Kyler, Intergovernmental Relations Manager, Austin Ramirez, Interim Community and Economic Development Manager, and Ben Bosse, Project Engineer with Kennedy Jenks. And I'm sorry, first and foremost, for the delay in this matter, and I appreciate you all being here. And who wants to lead this up? Mr. Hurley, are you the main?
We have a presentation for you, actually.
Okay.
Austin's going to lead off.
Very good. Well, welcome, and please take the time that you were asked to take.
Thank you. We appreciate your time today. As you see, we've got a team of staff working around the county on this project. As we've continued to work on Goshen, it's become more complex and more nuanced. And so we've got the A team working on it, and we've got some updates for you today, some context, and what's required moving forward if the board should choose to do so. Before we start, I do want to acknowledge our state partners who have recognized this as a regional opportunity and have provided funding to help our work. That's the Department of Land Conservation and Development and the Infrastructure Finance Authority. They've been great partners and very supportive. Some brief history. In 2011, the board directed staff to explore ideas to increase development and employment within Goshen. This paralleled a shift in our economic development platform to look at better ways to leverage our dollars, from small grant programs to investments in large-scale and lasting infrastructure to support our communities for decades. As such, a goal was created that by 2017, Lane County will transform existing industrial land in Goshen to support increased levels of development, resulting in jobs that pay no less than 150% of the median wage. We have not reached that goal completely. It was a pretty bold goal to make, looking back from my perspective, but we have made great strides in that time. I think it's also important to note that our current work on Goshen has ties to the strategic priorities adopted by the board. The work relates to robust infrastructure, vibrant communities, a safe and healthy county, and our people and partnerships. It's much more than just an infrastructure or wastewater project. Part of the reason why it's got such regional significance is because of the unique character of Goshen. We have more than 300 acres of contiguous industrial land, easy access to highways, rail, power, potentially natural gas in some areas. Water is provided by a private supplier, fiber optics and communications, as well as good proximity to labor markets. And so it is for these reasons why Goshen is very unique, not only in the state, but in the West Coast and Pacific Northwest. It's hard to find industrial lands of this size with all of those attributes in one area. If we sort of zone in on the site, most of it is zoned general industrial with some light industrial. It's important to note it is under private ownership at this time, and it is really being underutilized and not maximizing its regional potential, which is why it's such a prime candidate for redevelopment. A few weeks ago, an opportunity came through Business Oregon on a lead from an international manufacturing firm, Advanced Manufacturing, looking for 200 acres in Oregon. $750 million investment with 2,000 jobs. They will get very few responses from the state, let alone any from the West Coast. That type of ask can't be met right now, and so that is why the state and the county have historically seen this as such a good opportunity to really be an opportunity for green jobs, if that's what we desire, for high-paying jobs, for more jobs, and a way to diversify our regional economy and make it more resilient. Because the state saw this as such a regionally significant industrial area, they gave us that designation, the RISIA, with the purpose of preserving the state's best industrial lands. There are a variety of benefits that come with it. At this point, the main one is that it prioritizes ODOT funding for transportation improvements, which will be required if we move forward at some point. This designation is in effect for 10 years, so it's set to sunset in 2022. At this point, the state is recommending we apply for the RISIS program, Regionally Significant Industrial Site, just sort of a new and improved version of the RISIA program that provides state income tax reimbursements for public investments for industrial land readiness. It's performance-based, so you have to accomplish the terms before you're awarded any of that reimbursement. If the board directs staff to continue with this work, that's an option we will continue to explore further. At this point, I'm going to pass it off to Alex, talk a little bit about some of the barriers and opportunities.
Okay. So the effort that Austin described, there were two things that were moving forward in parallel. One was getting the regionally significant industrial area designation, which came out of a Senate bill in 2011 that Senator Beyer had championed. And as you recall, the state was really sort of in and coming out of, or trying to come out of, the recession. And so strategies like the RSIA designation were really functional at the time. So the other part of our effort was to get the land use zoning down in Goshen correct, and that took a Goal 14 exception effort, because previous to the work that we did there, you could develop Goshen only to a rural industrial scale, and that under land use law has some very specific and limiting square footage for industrial sites. So we were able to go through that process of the taking the exception to Goal 14. It essentially, the board was worked on amending Chapter 16. I think there were 6 readings of that by the time it was all said and done, and about midway into 2013, the board finally did adopt those into Chapter 16. There was a remand. There was the decision was appealed to LUBA by Landwatch Lane County, And LUBA then remanded the decision on 3 items that are listed there on the slide. And that process then involved the board going back and sort of rectifying that situation in code. And it doesn't really go back to LUBA. It would only have gone back to LUBA if there were an appeal and the appeal period ran out, and thus Chapter 16 took effect as written. So one of the things that was remanded back to us was to address the feasibility of providing sewer to that area. And I think actually by then we'd already entered into our first contract to start to look at wastewater feasibility down in Goshen, because we recognized that it was sort of a challenge at any rate. And the very first part of that work was to look at, should we have a standalone treatment plant like Coburg had done and like Cresswell was doing, or should we try to tie into the, what were the options available to the county? So we've gone through a couple iterations beyond that now. Go ahead to the next slide. So here you can see the timeline where we've been working. We are in front of you today to sort of go to the next step in terms of getting the project to a readiness situation where we can actually go to funders to look for the necessary funding to actually build the system out. Okay. And we first called this slide remaining challenges, and I was like, no, we can turn these into opportunities as well. Wastewater clearly is an issue in Goshen. I mean, there is the ability to do some on-site, but it definitely limits what kind of development could happen down there. And we experienced some of that already. Board members may recall at one point in time we were talking to a couple different companies as a result of some of the leads like Austin has described. And anything like particularly around food processing, which was a priority for the county, is just really off the table because of the sewer needs down there. So the other opportunity that we see is in transportation improvements. This project, in a way, does link to discussions about the Glenwood solid waste transfer station and moving that facility out of Glenwood. We see a real opportunity in terms of trying to make that southern terminus to Goshen improved. That's the Dillard overpass, which right now has just one access to the freeway, which is if you're heading northbound, you can actually take an exit to get off. But otherwise, you're using either an exit to the north or to the south to get into to Goshen. And the same for going back north. In particular, when we look at the garbage haulers who utilize, and the county for that matter, who utilize trips day in and day out to Short Mountain, they're coming back up through Goshen to get onto I-5. And in fact, they actually have to go a little bit east on Highway 58 to get up onto I-5. So it's less than ideal. Now, again, what we're trying to do is to get this to a situation where we can actually present the idea to potential funders at state and federal level. Just like what we've seen in a number of attempts to get transportation projects funded, they really have to be ready. And I think I've gained a new appreciation for what readiness actually means. City of Springfield had done a pitch to USDOT for a Tiger project for Glenwood. They were found to be not ready. We did the same thing with a recent 2 years ago, build application for Territorial Highway. Again, we were just deemed that we would not be able to complete the project, get all the funding obligated within the time frame that they wanted. So, it just got to me to be like, okay, when they say ready, they really mean ready. And so what we're trying to do is to before we can go really pitch this thing, we need, for just lack of a better term, a set of blueprints that really show that this is real. The other piece is that we need an agreement from Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission to be able to tie into their system. So there's a couple of things that are still in front of us on the project. There are probably some interesting opportunities for partnerships in the future. MWMC, obviously, we're already a partner to that organization, but that is a potential to strengthen that agreement. Both the City of Springfield and the City of Eugene, City of Springfield actually already looked at Goshen at one point in time to see if that might be a way to expand their urban growth boundary. I know the City of Eugene is looking more and more over to the LCC basin for expansion potential, and Goshen is really situated right there. The other partnerships that I think are worth considering is the expansion of, if we're gonna dig a trench, an 8-mile or so trench in the ground. What are the opportunities for other utilities who might want to get in there, particularly natural gas? And then finally, there's a conversation about what sort of potential does the recent federal construct of opportunity zones present to us. There is an opportunity zone that was designated that catches the western edge of I-5. And while our preferred route has not really considered going up the western side, depending on what sort of partnerships we might be able to establish, again, that could offer us a potential for some funding that we hadn't previously considered. So really, again, where we're trying to get is to actually have a project that's really ready, and then we can start to set the stage for some of those partnership ideas and funding proposals.
Thanks. My name is Ben Bosse. I work with.
Can you pull your microphone?
Sure.
Right there.
My name is Ben Bosse. I work with Kennedy Jenks Consultants. We're the county's design engineer on the project. Kennedy Jenks was first contracted with the county in 2014 to prepare a wastewater feasibility study. And as Alex mentioned, this was in response to a requirement from the LUBA remand that required the county to demonstrate feasibility for providing wastewater service to the Goshen area. So in our study, we evaluated a number of different treatment alternatives, including several alternatives that propose construction of an entirely new treatment plant that would be located within Goshen, as well as a regional connection alternative. The regional connection alternative would propose to pump Goshen wastewater flows north from Goshen to the existing City of Springfield and MWMC systems. Our evaluation ultimately recommended the regional connection alternative. This was based primarily on a cost comparison of those alternatives. However, it was also determined that the regional connection alternative would present the least amount of challenges from a project permitting perspective with respect to the discharge of treated effluent. Some of the key elements associated with this alternative include land acquisition for locating and constructing pump stations. It includes the construction of pipelines within existing right-of-ways along Highway 99 between Goshen and the City of Springfield. The pipeline is proposed to be a pressurized line, and as such, it would prevent any connections or taps to serve any parcels located between Goshen and the City of Springfield. We conducted an initial review with City of Springfield to assess the existing capacity of the proposed sewer for that connection, as well as the downstream pumping facilities. And we're able to determine that there was sufficient capacity available for the proposed Goshen connection. The regional connection alternative would follow a phased construction approach, and so this would include right-sized equipment and infrastructure sized for initial startup of the system, and would also include the flexibility for adding equipment and capacity as businesses move in and connect to the system. The recommended alternative includes 2 parallel pipelines. These are sized as 8 inches, and they lead from Goshen up to Springfield. These are recommended in order to maintain project design criteria that relate to preferred pipeline velocities and detention times. And so those are provided and recommended in order to serve Goshen during the startup conditions as well as future conditions. In February of 2015, we presented our findings to the board, and at that time identified several key next steps for the project, including coordination with MWMC to lay the groundwork for policy updates and changes, as well as a need to estimate the connection charges for the project. Flip over to the next slide. To estimate these charges, the county first met with City of Springfield and MWMC to discuss various options that would present equitable solutions for the various governing bodies. Following that meeting, Kennedy Jenks and its subconsultant, Ghilardi Consulting, developed an evaluation which included 3 alternatives for estimating the connection charges. The first alternative was the MWMC SDC base model, and this is the standard MWMC methodology for assessing SDCs. It was most recently updated in 2016. We also looked at a modified approach that included several adjustments related to applying credit to the proposed connection for future debt payments on future capital improvement projects, as well as additional fees that would be added to the SDC to account for compliance fees that the utility would face as a result of complying with Oregon SDC statutes. And we also looked at a third alternative termed a buy-in model. This model proposes to take the value of the entire system and express this on a per connection basis. And then that unit cost is used as a rough approximation of what the potential costs for providing the additional capacity might be. The results of this evaluation indicated a range of connection charges between $10.3 and $11.1 million. These are inclusive of not only the MWMC connection charges, but also the City of Springfield charges for Springfield infrastructure. Following the completion of this evaluation, the county and MWMC have held preliminary discussions to review potential options for payment schedule. From those discussions, several options have arisen, including a lump sum approach, an approach that would have phased payments as businesses move in and SDCs are paid, as well as a third hybrid approach that would include some form of upfront payment along with SDC installments to follow that. I should note that at this time, we did circle back to look at overall project costs. So including the connection charges, the regional connection alternative was still found to be approximately 30% less costly than the next closest alternative. These findings were last presented to the board in August of 2018. And as part of that presentation, the county identified an additional regional benefit associated with that project, something that Alex discussed briefly. And that includes the construction of pump stations and pipelines to connect the Short Mountain landfill to the MWMC system. So you can forward to the next slide. And we'll pass over to Dan to pick up from there.
So Austin spoke about the benefits of this project on a community scale and jobs it could provide. I wanted to speak from the Public Works perspective on the connection to the landfill and some environmental benefits of this project. Depending on how development proceeds there and how the board would guide development, there could be the potential for green industry development. The proximity to the landfill could make it an ideal spot for materials diverted from the landfill, if that was to be encouraged. But most directly, the benefit would be that wastewater connection to the landfill. The proposal would be to extend from Goshen to the landfill a 4-inch pipe for carrying the leachate, the wastewater that's generated from the landfill, to the MWMC system. So that pipe wouldn't be sized for development. It would only be sized for the needs of the landfill. And the landfill generates about 25 million gallons of leachate every year. And to put that into perspective, we generate about 50,000 miles of tanker truck travel, transporting that leachate from the landfill to its connection in Springfield. That the wastewater, that leachate already goes into the MWMC system, so it wouldn't be adding to their volumes there, but it would be reducing those transportation miles. That's we spend about $250,000 a year on that transportation, and the vehicle miles are the equivalent of doing 20 trips across the country with a tanker truck. So would love to eliminate those emissions. And
how big are the tankers?
The tanker is about 7,000
7,000 gallons of nasty stuff, is that?
Right. And to get that hazard off the roadway would be a great benefit. We've been very interested in constructing a pipeline for more than 30 years, and this could see some great potential of tying into the Goshen project through that.
Okay, I wanted to just finish up by providing a brief update on the county's progress since our last board presentation. The county has recently completed the next design milestone in the project, which is the project definition phase. Our first task in this phase was to update the 2015 estimated costs to include escalation. This assumes connection of Goshen to occur just prior to the RSIA sunset in 2022. And so those revised costs are shown here on this slide. Costs include approximately $7 million for the construction of pump stations and force mains, approximately $6 million for the construction of the collection system or the sewer system that's going to serve Goshen, and then another $2 million for the landfill connection. I should note that these costs are total capital costs, and as such, they include things like project administration, permitting fees, legal and engineering services. Furthermore, we'd expect that the initial capital investment would be less than the $15 million total figure shown here. And again, that's due to the ability to phase the construction improvements as businesses move in and connect to the system. Costs were also updated to reflect the additional design detail that was provided by the project definition phase. In this phase, we completed pipeline route evaluations that selected preferred alignments. We were able to develop a project permitting plan, which identified any particular challenges related to permitting requirements that may be costly or have exceptionally long lead times. The additional design detail also supported the county in the development of a land use review for the project. And all these elements combined together help to provide a greater level of detail overall for the project, which only enhanced our ability to refine and estimate the total capital costs for the project. As we complete the project definition phase, we look forward to continuing to work with the county, particularly on the next steps of the project, which include additional coordination with MWMC to develop options for moving forward with policy changes, as well as refinement of the connection charges payment schedule and the options that we might consider for that. And with that, I'll let Dan complete.
And so Ben and his team at Kennedy Jenks have done some terrific work for us so far in getting us to this point, providing preliminary designs and construction cost estimates. The next phase for this work would be to continue to refine that work, and particularly around estimating the funding for connection charges to MWMC, beginning negotiations with MWMC, and figuring out how we could time any sort of payments to make this a phased approach so it's not that initial sticker shock. So we are looking for your endorsement at this point to engage with MWMC to do that work. There's lots that we need to figure out for that IGA, what would be required for industrial pretreatment, how it would relate to their permit, what capacity they have, and ensuring that Goshen is paying its way and not causing additional costs for current users of the system. And I would like to mention that Matt Stouter is in the audience and may be able to take some questions if you have any for MWMC. He's the general manager for MWMC. So this project has been moving for many years and through different members on the board. At this point, we wanted to come back with you because a few of you have not been engaged in that conversation through the years and ensure that you are on board with continuing to move this work forward, because the next phase will be that work with MWMC, and it relates to our partners with the City of Eugene and the City of Springfield in that agreement.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm sure the commissioners have questions, and I'll call on Commissioner Buck first. This is in her area.
Surprise. I have some concerns, but I also see some really good opportunities for the work that you've been doing. My concern mainly would be that I've never once heard a demand from any residents that they wanted this project. And maybe that's occurred in the past for other folks, but it's never been conveyed to me from residents in the area of my district where this resides. even so, I think connecting up to Short Mountain is a no-brainer. I can't see why we wouldn't want to move forward with that. And I am intrigued with the idea of the industrial area with a potential green zone attributed to it. I don't know how that would be placed in a project like this. But as we discuss potential green industry within Lane County, and especially, as we struggle with trying to find more recycling programs, reducing waste from our landfill, that may make more sense closer to Short Mountain. That really makes sense to me. And if, I would really support that direction as we proceed through these additional steps. I get the impression that this will take several more years. And so what is the timeline that you foresee for this project?
Very good question. I'm not sure. I think it will depend when we engage with MWMC. I'm not sure how quickly we move through that process. I would think that a negotiation of terms would take about 6 months, and then move through a process of approval from the different entities of MWMC. I'm not sure how receptive the city of Eugene will be for this project, frankly, but we'd have to move through that strategically and, with good communication with the city.
Is there any concern from the other governmental agencies about the use of the land once it's connected?
I haven't heard that. There were concerns in the past, and I'm way back in the past, in the 90s, when a pipeline to the landfill was considered. I haven't heard those concerns voiced. I'm not sure how aware they are of this project. So that's the negotiation of the connection piece of it, but then there's the whole construction piece. We haven't figured out funding for that, how quickly that could come together. There's the potential that the solid waste fund could fund the part for the connection to the landfill in a shorter period of time, but not sure if it's funded just by the connections of the users to the system through system development charges. That could take a very long time, and I don't know what money would be available to loan for the upfront capital for the construction. So we need to work. That's the next phase of this work, is to really explore those funding possibilities and timing.
So it sounds like the concerns you might receive from the city might be more financial than anything.
I think we need to ensure with the city, I think the financial piece, that when we're entering into an agreement to bring Goshen into the capacity of the system, that it's not impacting their users in the city.
Okay. Who wants to be recognized?
I'll go after Commissioner.
Okay, Commissioner Farr, and then Commissioner Bozovich, Commissioner.
Pete, if you'd rather somebody else do it, go ahead with somebody else. You seem to want somebody else, so go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go.
Oh,
Yeah?
okay.
Is that okay?
Whoever wants to go next can go.
Okay. Could you go back to the slide that identified the 3 remand areas from LUBA? Just a few real quick questions. How isn't the first bullet point? Has the first bullet point been addressed, or does it need to be at this point in time?
I can take a stab at that. It does no longer needs to be addressed because the Chapter 16 was not appealed subsequent to that. We also, at the time that we were working through this, you may recall there was some brownfields funding as well that the county had. And so then in Austin's seat was Sarah Means, and she was working on some brownfields remediation down in the Goshen area, at least making that opportunity available to property owners.
Thank you. And my understanding is, as it relates to Short Mountain, which this seems like it would be a significant piece of our attempting to decrease carbon emissions and waste. Is it correct that now natural gas that might be created from processing some of the organic debris is now allowed to be piped and put into the Northwest Natural.
That is correct. That is a potential possibility. If we were to change our system from the current use is to generate power at the landfill through the landfilled waste. If we were to take those organics out on the front end and put those into an anaerobic digester to produce methane gas, that could be cleaned up and put to the pipeline.
And that's, Commissioner Burning, that's a brand-new opportunity that just came out of the last legislative session.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, Senate Bill 98, which allows, it sort of directed the PUC to allow gas utilities, instead of buying lease cost, which they were previously mandated to purchase lease cost gas, to look at other options and to sort of add to their portfolio up to a certain percentage renewable natural gas. So you're seeing now Northwest Natural Gas working with, in particular, the city of Portland at their wastewater treatment, as well as the city of Eugene at their wastewater treatment works to get, that's a fairly readily available source of gas, but certainly on their radar screen are landfills and dairies as well to try to capture new sources of renewable natural gas. And they're definitely under, I mean, a lot of the testimony this morning, those people are really calling for change and, but for a few votes that would have made it across the finish line in Salem. Again, a framework to really sort of put utilities, both electric and natural gas utilities, under the microscope to find new sources of ways to offset carbon emissions.
Thank you. And then this is the dumb question. Even though we see all these millions of dollars, I've had the opportunity to work with Kennedy Jenks, but even though we've seen all these millions of dollars, this ask is just for 100,000, correct? So that it doesn't commit us to those kinds of numbers. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, what we're really trying to do, so to get to the question that Commissioner Buck asked as well, we've got an immediate process to get through in terms of finalizing sort of the preferred route and the equipment necessary, finalizing the agreement with MWMC. Then we've actually got something to take with us, for example, to Washington, D.C. when we go to pitch, to go to the legislature and to pitch. And that could take, I don't know. If we get lucky, it would take a year. If we don't get lucky, we're going to be at it for a couple of years. But you're absolutely right. What we're just trying to do is get the project to a place where we can present it for funding opportunities, unless there's some other way that people want to propose coming up with the, the $15 million to dig the trench,
Right.
which I'm unaware of at this point in time, other than for that little piece that would connect Goshen to the landfill.
Well, I just wanted to clarify for myself, so thank you, because we saw so much time devoted to those numbers. So in terms of actually laying the pipe, will this be the last piece of getting as far as we can go without getting anywhere so we can try to get somewhere? Or will there be other consulting required to start pitching a project and be ready, as you were saying?
I am not aware of anything past that. Once we are in a, in a ready situation.
This would get
I'm not aware of any now. You want to get into sort of the vision for some kind of green development. Obviously, you're aware we don't own anything in Goshen. And so if that were the case, then you'd sort of start into that phase of the project, like, oh, the potential that is equal to what, or competes with what Austin sees from these state leads could be a Lane County initiated effort. That might take some work, but in terms of the actual project of digging the trench, I think we would be in a situation ready to roll.
Yeah, there would more than likely be subconsultant costs associated with biological assessment.
Can't hear you, I'm sorry.
Sorry, there would more than likely be subconsultant costs that would go along with any pipeline project to conduct biological assessments, environmental assessments, and the things like that for certain portions of a pipeline alignment. Certain sections of our pipeline are proposed to be constructed via trenchless methods. That's a a niche industry, and so that would probably be another element that would be sub-consulted. So technically there would be other consulting costs, but our capital costs that were presented earlier are inclusive of these costs. We take an estimate on the bottom line on what the overall engineering services would be.
Well, thank you. I sure didn't mean to interrupt anyone else's questions, but it seems to me, seems to me that I look forward to having the discussion of, a green industrial zone and a variety of ways to filter the kind of development we would like. But right now, it sounds like all we're doing is just laying the foundation for something, and it would be a shame not to get us to this next level. So thank you very much.
Okay, who wants to go next? Pat?
Sure. That's before me.
The pipeline to Short Mountain was killed by the city of Eugene, basically, back when I was a city councilor in '97 or so. If we'd put it in then, it would have been a lot cheaper, and we wouldn't have been trucking all that wastewater for all of those years. So that's wastewater under the bridge, but it really is it's
Bridge, actually.
On the record, all right.
But one thing that you're looking for right now is a reaffirmation that the Board of County Commissioners is in favor of moving forward with the redevelopment of previously developed land in Goshen. It's already zoned industrial, most of it heavy industrial, some of it light industrial. And there are the benefits that go along with it. I talk to people quite frequently about what are the benefits of developing any industrial land. And Austin, help me, why on earth would we want to develop this land?
Yeah, Oregon's land use is incredibly difficult to work with, and the amount of land available for industrial use is incredibly in short supply. These industrial companies and advanced manufacturing companies or food and beverage manufacturing companies that use these industrial lands tend to be traded sector, tend to be resilient to economic downturn, pay higher wages, hire more people, and because they are traded sector, they bring in investment from outside markets back home to Lane County and help essentially fuel our economy, make it more resilient, and help drive the engine a little bit more than some of the smaller non-traded sector businesses we find in other areas.
You put that very, very succinctly. Jobs, well-paying jobs that drive outside investment in creating the infrastructure to create the jobs. Okay, seems like a good return on whatever investment we put into it at this point in time. In addition to the possibility of not trucking waste, the side benefit of not trucking waste over the freeway, regarding the natural gas at the Short Mountain, Matt, you're in the audience. We're going through that process right now with our wastewater treatment plant, and it's not, you don't just throw a switch and it happens. It's been quite a lengthy discussion that we've been having at MWMC, but it can happen, and I think the rules are all in place to answer the question of can we use natural gas? Yes, we can, but we can't just suck it off the tip and into the natural gas grid. So we do have experience in that. So the questions that are asked are, why would we want to develop the land? Well, jobs, well-paying jobs that attract outside investment. The land's already been disturbed. There's a potential for significant transportation improvement in the area. And we can quit trucking waste up the freeway. So the benefits seem pretty immense to me. We've been talking about this since 2012, I think, at this board level. It's been a little bit hypothetical as we move through some of the regulations, but we're getting a little bit closer to actually seeing it happen. So you asked, is this board in support of moving forward with whatever studies need to be done? I am, of course, in support of it, based upon the fact that the return on the investment is going to be more than just the tiny local area. It's going to be for the entire region.
Commissioner Sorensen, do you mind if I just add on?
No, go ahead.
Commissioner Farr, the other benefit, of course, and something we talked about when this idea very first surfaced was, from a sort of competitive perspective, Goshen offers some pretty low tax rates, right? I mean, there's a county tax rate there, there's a LCC permanent rate and bond. There's a fire district and I think parts of Goshen Pay into Crestwell School District. So relatively speaking, not a whole lot of tax burden on potential customers. And of course, then there's the tax revenue that would flow to the county from improvements, tax revenue that would flow to the state in terms of income tax and any equipment that's centrally assessed. So there's a couple of, sort of selfish reasons for that kind of development down there being a good thing for Lane County in terms of our own revenue picture.
Thank you for that refresher.
One other thing, and we really should acknowledge the city of Springfield. They brought Goshen into their enterprise zone, and cities are only given a certain amount of acreage for enterprise zones, and they were generous enough to include that in theirs. And that's one of the few economic development incentives our state has. It's performance-based, so companies have to do certain things to achieve those benefits. First source hiring agreements, so they're hiring locally first, infrastructure improvements, as well as, really making sure that they're doing what the public agencies need to see them do so that we have a regional impact.
So for instance, could Springfield, since it's their enterprise zone, could they add green development, green industry as one of the requirements of development?
I'm not sure. I'd have to talk to them and also with the state, with Business Oregon, to see how they manage those requirements.
There are no points that you're aware of that they would get for specifying green?
Not currently.
Thank you. So this effort started, somewhere, I think it sort of became an idea for Commissioner Stewart somewhere around 2009 and really became a board effort about 2011 when we adopted a strategic plan back then. It became one of the goals of the strategic plan was the Goal 14 exception. And it started in the recession, when a lot of folks were asking for jobs. You said your folks aren't asking for it now. Well, right now we're at full employment. There aren't that many people clamoring for jobs, but there will be another recession. And you can see how long it's taken us just to get this far, and we're projecting, out to 2022 timelines right now. Keeping this moving in the pipeline is an insurance policy. Maybe the next recession we won't be lagging behind Portland years in our recovery. I mean, I think if you've been here for our updates where the state, the folks from the state have come and told us about our economic indicators. For a long time, Portland recovered almost right away from the recession as far as job loss. The whole rest of the state was way behind, and Lane County took a long time to get back to the number of jobs we had pre-recession. Part of that is we just aren't as well diversified in our economy, and this was a strategy to add diversity at a time when a lot of people were asking for it. Now today, when everything's rosy, and this is one of those things they always tell you, you should start your savings account when things are going well, not when things are going bad sometimes. So this is just continuing to work on our savings account, I think, and having that diversity in our economy. And, going back to, while this slide's still up there, we didn't just wait for the appeals period to be over with and say, okay, we're good. We actually did the studies, adopted an amendment to our code, and then waited for the appeals period for that adoption of that amended code that addressed the remand issues to expire. So we did address those three issues. It wasn't like we readopted the code without even thinking about it and we just waited out land watch. So there was action to address those three remand issues. And in the initial drafting of the Goal 14 exception and adopting Chapter 16 in the first place, there was significant negotiations with Thousand Friends, particularly over the issue of transportation facilities and whether these were going to be warehouses and just used for trucking versus manufacturing, and making sure the code language around those properties was going to be job-intensive uses, not a big warehouse that trucks show up once in a while. And that, Thousand Friends was ultimately very involved in that, and they were not a party to the appeal because they were satisfied we had met their concerns about, just making this a big warehouse site and not getting a job benefit out of it. So there's a little bit of history there, maybe kind of wasn't exactly covered by the presentation, that I just want to try to put into context. And there's so many side benefits we haven't mentioned somewhat. There's a benefit around transportation for the landfill that this is probably going to drive the improvements. There's been a study done by ODOT, I think, I think it was, they might have actually gone through an IAMP for all those interchanges in this area, because there is a big concern, and it was directed by actually some legislation in the state to look at 30th Avenue, 58 and 99, Dillard Access Road, Franklin 99 in Eugene, and that whole corridor of interchanges. And this development could drive the funding need and get those interchanges fixed, which is going to allow the access to Short Mountain to possibly put that recycling plant there and be able to get the trucks on and off of I-5 to feed the recycling plant, So there's so much benefit there. Not to mention, and this is one of my comments, and I'd like to add, because I do support the direction of moving ahead, is to not forget to involve Lane Community College in some of your discussions. I know we keep talking about not having any connections in between, but they are there now with a private sewage system. Whether or not they want to get involved or not is up to their board, and whether, it complicates things too much might be something you guys want to look at, but we are going to take a pipeline right past their private system. And whether or not they want to get in on the system or not, that's something that we might want to take a look at for their long-term health of their infrastructure. In addition, having employers in Goshen's going to make the possibility of the Southern MX leg possible. It's never going to work with LCC as the anchor. It's not a year-round, 7-day-a-week trip generator. This is, anyone that's been up I-5 past 30th Avenue at the beginning of term for LCC understands the need for some better mass transit connections. But it's just that. It's a peak in certain periods. There are periods you're never going to generate, winter break, summertime, weekends. You're just not generating the trips that'll support MX. Glenwood at the end of that with industrial uses, someday in the future, MX will make sense to the south. It'll never make sense without that anchor down there. So, that's just one of the benefits that comes with this. I could go on about all the side benefits that are possible, but, just think of this one thing. We're working towards 0 deaths in our traffic planning, and we're talking about, 50,000 tanker truck miles up and down a section of I-5 that's one of the busiest sections in our county, and the number of trips that truck makes increase the rainier the weather gets, because that's when the liquors come off the landfills in the wet weather. So we're sending that truck up and down I-5 in the wintertime when the U of O is in session, LCC is in session, so it's the heaviest traffic and the most dangerous conditions. Doesn't it make sense to have that pipeline connected and take those 50,000 truck miles off that section of road during the wet weather? So I just really support the effort. I really think in the long run, it's an insurance policy against the next economic downturn, and we just have to keep moving in this direction. And it's just good for our state to have that industrial land available.
Thank you. Well, I would say, having been witnessing these discussions for a number of years, that I'm going to give you some more skepticism than has been previously mentioned here. The first is that by expanding the urban footprint of the Eugene-Springfield area to encompass the landfill and the Goshen land and the land adjacent to the current urban growth boundary, putting this kind of infrastructure in place will inevitably drive out the development. And the people that are going to benefit from that are probably going to be happy about it, but the people that are going to have to pay for it, i.e. the remainder of us, might not be. So number one, I really want to see more attention to what's the impact of this on the metro area to bulb out and inevitably bulb out the development, and specifically the carbon and transportation impact of putting more and more low-density property within the urban footprint of Eugene and Lane County and Springfield. So that's my first one. My second one is we don't have to dump the wastewater from Short Mountain into the wastewater system, because many landfills have on-site cleaning up of taking heavy metals out of the waste stream. And one that I refer is, and I've personally gone up there just to take a drink of water out of it, is the Courthouse landfill, where they don't put water into their domestic wastewater system. They put it into a creek after it's been cleaned up. And so to me, and just in my travels around the United States, Savannah, Georgia does that too. There's lots of other places in the country that have rainfall comparable to ours that do not run trucks up and down a freeway, that do not haul and spend the money to haul water that shouldn't go into a river untreated or slightly treated. And I really question whether or not taking heavy metals from Short Mountain landfill and dumping into a wastewater system that was designed for biological waste. That's what our wastewater system was designed for. It wasn't designed for this type of intense water pollution. So to me, it's bad news for the Willamette River, whether or not we move ahead with this particular project. It's bad news to take these heavy metals that are the product of this leachate, that are in the leachate, particularly when there's technologies that have been used around the country in other landfills in areas that have the same kind of rainfall we have. So I remain skeptical on the impact of it going in terms of making the metropolitan area bigger. And it's inevitable, as Commissioner Bozovich was intimating, that other landowners are going to want to buy into this. Like LCC might want to get in on this. Other people that own land nearby want to be able to connect to this pipeline if it's built. So I would say, well, if we care about the river, let's clean up the stuff before it even gets off of our property. And number two, let's make sure we understand what the carbon effect is of bulbing out the Eugene-Springfield metro area out there. I agree with Commissioner Buck. In all the time that the board's been talking about this, no one has said to me, oh, man, we got to really expand. You guys got to build that pipeline down a freeway, because it's really important for X. People don't come in and say that. And so I just want to put a big block of horse block of salt here on this thing to make sure that we're really thinking it through. And the questions that I've asked, I think, are legitimate concerns about the water pollution in the river and about who's going to benefit from the public investment in the various types of pipelines that have been discussed here today.
Commissioner, I'm not going to speak to the development issues, but on the wastewater issues, all of the landfills in the state of Oregon discharge to a wastewater treatment plant. There was sort of a fad in the 90s of the belief in on-site treatment, and Corvallis, Coffin Butte landfill, built a system. We built a system. The board directed to do on-site treatment in the 90s. We started a project called Temporary Trucking of Leachate that has continued through that entire time. But we spent over $2 million on a reverse osmosis system at the landfill that completely failed. So that technology, while it exists, is super expensive and is not the treatment of choice generally and across the state.
Okay. And so, obviously, in my view, more looking has to occur. Like, I'm not going to give up and say, oh, well, it's okay to dump heavy metals into the Willamette River. I just feel that's wrong, whether it's done by a truck or a pipeline, you know. But thank you for the update. Okay, another round. Okay, Commissioner.
I wouldn't mind if Todd, if you wouldn't mind addressing whether we're dumping heavy metals in the Willamette River right now.
Sure. Matt Stouter, and Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission General Manager. Good afternoon. The Lane County facility in Glenwood, the transfer station is regulated under the federal pretreatment standards, and so you're permitted to discharge to our system. As Mr. Hurley mentioned, there are pollutant removal mechanisms that occur pre-treated before the waste is discharged to our system. So I would characterize it as we're not dumping heavy metals, or heavy metals from your facility aren't coming into our system. In the context of which you're speaking there, you're permitted to discharge, and there's local limits that have been established that we have. So backing up, all the industries in town that discharge to our system have to meet certain limits that have been established. Those limits are reviewed pretty much on a semi-annual basis, and we just completed a review recently after a program audit by DEQ. The limits that we have in place have been found to be very protective of plant processes that we have in place. So I would say we're on the right track, and we're not discharging heavy metals to the river. If there's further discussion or clarification,
Well, we're within limits.
We're within the limits that are mandated in our permit that have been established by the state through total maximum daily load processes and other mechanisms.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so do other commissioners want to make any more remarks or ask any other questions? Go ahead.
The only thing that I would say is that what I'm enthused about in terms of the possibility of these pipes is that they lead us closer to an investment that this board may consider at our landfill of a sorting system that I went and visited, if you recall, and reported back on. And that manufacturer is extremely interested in financing that entire thing, and only requires a couple of infrastructure items, and this is one of them.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for your presentation, all the information.
Do you need further direction from the board?
We don't need further direction at this time. The contract is extension that we would be doing is within the authority of the county administrator. So we would be moving forward.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have a few more things to do. My idea would be that we would go upstairs and we'd have a recess to allow Ms. Nichols to come over, and while we're waiting for her, we would start going into some of the things on the list that's remaining to do. Any guidance from any commissioners on that idea?
Why don't we finish those work list here?
Okay.
Give Ms. Nichols her 10-minute notice.
Okay, very good. So why don't we go then to Commissioner Agenda Team Request, item 14B. And I believe Commissioner Buck, you wanted to be recognized on that.
Thank you, Chair. Earlier in the day, I mentioned I would probably bring up two different items. Under the agenda team section, I think that really fits with this current assignment that we have open, a request, I'll just read it so we all know we're on the same page. A request was made to have staff work with Mr. Eisenbach to discuss his proposal for a housing bond. The request was for HHS budget financed together with Better Housing Together, and anyone involved in housing matters to look upon, to look in what a bond proposal actually is, and should Lane County be looking further into this option. That's it in its entirety. Now that we've had our presentation with Better Housing Together, and we know that they're going to be moving forward with a comprehensive housing action plan, I see that this particular request either be complete or considered as part of Better Housing Together's full analysis of our housing action plan.
Okay.
I think we just need to make a decision, and if that's whatever.
So is it your idea that the work that Better Housing Together is going to be doing with Lane County would incorporate that?
Right.
Yeah, okay. Other commissioners, we want to make sure that we are clear with staff on what they're doing. So that's why this was brought up today.
I'm good with that.
Okay?
As am I.
Okay, so that'll be our update that Ms. Jones can put on the, completed items, and we'll be hearing from Better Housing Together as part of their reporting. I guess they're coming back in December. I believe that's what she said.
For an update, but the final recommendations,
Yeah.
I think are slated for spring of 2020.
20, correct. Okay, any other agenda team requests? Or, yep.
So going back to the issue of the waiver of liens relative to compliance and properties that have been foreclosed and resold, I would still like to have a public discussion of that with staff. One, I want to understand how a property owner is supposed to see that in a title report, because, and whether, or are we identifying those liens when a property does come for sale in foreclosure as the count, so I want to understand that. I also want to understand a legal issue, I believe there is whether or not those, that lien, whether banks would agree to releasing them from the foreclosure process if they understood that that lien was purely an administrative fine versus some remedial action that was taken on the property that adds value. Yeah, and this is an interesting legal concept, but I want to better understand that, so then we can make a determination: are we really making an exception on this property and establishing precedent, or not? And along with that, part of my issue is you're seeing these properties go into foreclosure with all these fines built up. And I know of several properties in my district that are heading in this direction. The fines and the compliance fines are doing nothing to change the situation. So the question from the board is, and this may be a separate agenda team request, so this is two requests maybe. First is to go ahead and have a public discussion of the waiver of fines and understanding that. Second might be that we have a discussion of, do we need a code change to have a stronger enforcement tool in our toolbox around problem houses? And I kind of keep that general, but I'm familiar with, a property right now that every structure on it's been red tagged and the people are still living there, and in addition have associates living there in tents and sheds, and they're known perpetrators of property crime in the area. And it's really difficult for me to look the neighbor in the eye and say, oh, well, we're building fines up against them that we might assess to the next owner after we foreclose. That just is not a satisfactory answer to the neighbor that's dealing with the stacks of tires that are full of mosquito larvae and the other issues that are going on to the property next door, So kind of two two-part agenda team request. One is, I'd like to get head nods to go ahead and have that discussion of the waiver of liens. We may end up agreeing with staff's recommendation, but I really want to have a public discussion of that. And two, maybe have staff come back and have an agenda item in the future about what we might be able to do to strengthen our ability around these problem properties. Because it amazes me that we don't have some kind of tool to deal with this. And I think there are other counties that have code around number of complaints eventually getting to a way of more action taken than we're doing, and in this state, not just in other states. So there may be a model for us to look at in other counties.
Well, I would just say that as to the request to go over this particular property that you had previously requested, we had the report from the administrator on that today. So I would say that to me is done. As to the idea of having a work session or staff come in from Public Works and from legal to talk about problem properties and how we could strengthen our code, make it easier for the county to do something about these problem properties, I would be in favor of that. But I would draw a distinction between revisiting the one that's already going, that we already had a report on. So, but that's just my point of view. Now, I'll call on other commissioners that want to.
Cresswell, right?
Yeah.
Property in, I've heard a little bit about it, and it seems there are some extenuating circumstances that maybe go beyond the report that we received today.
I would be in favor of both of those discussions. This particular property is in my district, and I've spoken to numerous people about it as well. It deserves a discussion. And on the second item, I experienced the same complaints, being in rural communities, it's a common complaint, and I think it would also deserve us thinking about it a little harder and seeing what we can do to help these folks.
It's a complaint on Chance Road in Tillamook. So.
I would either be the third or fourth to agree with both of those.
Great.
Okay, so you have the board's perspective on that.
And just a clarification regarding the Cresswell property, a little bit more discussion surrounding that.
Both items.
Yeah, that's number one. Number two is the enforcement issue.
Okay, any work session requests? Yes.
From earlier today, I mentioned that I would circle back to this, which is regarding the climate resolution. We had a lot of people speak on it today, and even before that, as I had mentioned, I thought when we set out on our climate action plan that, a resolution would be inevitable to consolidate our thoughts regarding the subject and our procedure to go forward and work on climate issues that are underway now. I think that deserves some discussion with Dan Hurley as he's moving forward with the climate action plan and discussing a resolution.
Okay. Other commissioners?
If I may, you said that a part of that is a discussion of what is underway currently in conjunction with things that we can do for the future toward a climate action plan.
Right, well, yes, because, we all got the email of a fairly broad climate action resolution. Yeah. But my feeling is that we need something that's more catered to Lane County and what we're doing locally to combat, climate change here.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to, on that point, share that the current assignment, this is the language of the current assignment. The board directed staff to move forward with phase 1 of the climate action plan. The board further directed staff to draft a statement or resolution from the board regarding efforts of the climate action plan. The resolution should be presented as part of phase 2 of the climate action plan. So that's the current, if you want to amend that, certainly can, but I just wanted to say that
See that now too.
Pretty close.
Yeah.
Go ahead and finish.
Well, I'd like
I'm
to
sorry.
get your,
No.
I'd like to get your thoughts if
Okay.
that's what you were going to talk
Go
about.
ahead.
If it's separate, don't worry about it.
Well, then I'll limit it to just that this time. I feel I did not particularly like creating a resolution around the housing emergency, but then I learned that it meant a lot to a lot of people, and it set a tone that we care, which we know we do. So my feeling is that by this board having now deliberated and said we're going to move in that direction, and if in fact a stated resolution is a part of what already has been agreed to, I think that will meet the desires of the people that were petitioning us. I would be hesitant to use a template, but I do think at some point a statement in the form of a resolution that actually is embedded in our current work, not just something from the outside imposed in, I would be absolutely in favor of it. It sounds like we've already agreed to do it. That's my only
Any other comments on the,
No, I mean, I didn't realize that it actually spelled out in our assignment this already. If phase 2, when this comes along, is like a year from now, I think that timing is a little long. But if it's going to be, you know, it's somewhat decent timeline, I'm fine with just leaving that the way it is.
okay, any other comments on the resolution that was presented today and whether we include it or not? I'll just say I do favor, you know, something like this resolution. I don't think waiting a year is a good idea. And if it were up to me, I would advance this resolution so we could debate it and pass it. Okay? Yep.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the request from those that even sent us that was that we create a statement within 3 months. And I believe their request was that we not just copy that verbatim, but they provided that as a template for input.
Okay. So
Perhaps we can ask staff, Dan, who's running this, to check in with you about what that timing really is, because I'm unclear. It just says phase 2. I don't really know the timing.
phase 2, it says phase 2 in there.
Yeah. I don't know what, I can inquire with Dan on that.
Well, why don't we agree that the assignment is that you'll report back to us? Okay. Very good. Any other work session requests at this time? Okay. So let's have the review of assignments before we do the reading of the executive session.
So Commissioner Buck's first request to remove the housing bond request from our assignments list, understanding that we're going to come back as part of the Affordable Housing Action Plan effort to consider what funding may be necessary moving forward to implement those recommendations. And then Commissioner Bozovich's 2 requests, one to have a public discussion in the short term regarding the Cresswell lien request. We'll schedule that for the earliest possible board meeting to discuss with Public Works and County Council staff. And then the second to have a work session with Public Works and County Council staff to discuss options for strengthening our ability to deal with problem property, nuisance properties, code compliance issues in the county.
Okay.
Good. And then I will follow up. I'll inquire with Mr. Hurley about the timing of the resolution related to the phase 1 and phase 2 of the climate action plan. I think I can report to the board next week on that.
All right, good. Were there any other items for review from other parts of the meeting?
Not that I had.
Okay, I didn't either, so, okay. So at this time, we'll move to item number 16, which is our executive session. And I'll be reading our executive session notice. We'll be in a recess for a few minutes while we gather upstairs at the Board of Commissioners conference room. So at this time, The Board of Commissioners will meet in executive session to consult with counsel regarding the rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. This executive session is held pursuant to RS 192.6602H, which allows the board to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come back out of executive session into public session should the need arise. And I believe there's one other item on our agenda, that's county council announcements. So I think we will be briefly having any announcements from county council. Okay, so we're in recess for a few minutes while we go upstairs.
Board meeting is long.